Keith Aldoberg stood among the ruins, gasping for breath, when he raised his hand and touched the unfamiliar weight on his own head. A cold horror overwhelmed him. He could not comprehend what was happening to himself, and he had no idea what fury had seized his body when he felt the sharp arc of horns where there were none before. The path led to Heart of Darkness, the Demon King's castle. Its torn spires jutted into the sky like broken teeth, and the surrounding landscape lay in silent, dust-covered ruin marking the entrance to a domain where only a few dared to tread. In the vast auditorium, the squad of heroes decisively moved forward, their footsteps echoing dully in the cold stone. A voice met them, vibrating through the floor, a chilling greeting confirming they had finally reached their destination. They looked up and saw him sitting on a throne of shadow and bones. The Demon King himself, with a gaze that felt heavy, as if it could be felt with the body. He addressed the arrivals, and his voice was laced with both mockery and genuine surprise. 4 of his elite generals had been defeated by mere mortals. He radiated an aura of suffocating magical energy that overshadowed everything else in the room. From the corner of his half-hidden gaze, Kit Aldoberg felt a drop of sweat roll down his temple. He was struck by the terrible realization that the heroes were facing a force of a completely different scale. Although he saw they had also prepared serious support for themselves. He recalls the moment of sharp rejection. A man in glasses brazenly mocked the very idea of an exceptional strategist and called it complete nonsense. Turning back to the present, the squad of travelers stands in a single formation before their enemy and declares that their survival so far is proof of their collective strength, while the Demon King looks at them with a tired, indifferent gaze. The leader of the heroes points his sword directly at the ancient monarch and boldly declares that his time is overran, that he will be the next. But the king responds only with a quiet, unpromising rustle of anger. In response, the Demon King releases a sudden, brutal surge of magical energy. It explodes outward, shattering the silence with a shockwave throughout the chamber and forcing the heroes to withstand the unbearable pressure. Despite heavy losses from just a single surge of magic, they quickly regroup. Joan checks Amari, and the rest acknowledge it. Her is little time left, and they must find a way to break through the king's defense as soon as possible. Deciding to end this pause, the swordsman lowers himself powerfully into a stance and orders Zot and Meralda to cover him for the final all-or-nothing strike, and this move makes the hidden observer stagger in shock. From where he stood, the young man with horns saw how everything was unfolding, and he was increasingly gripped by anxiety. Was this mad dash senseless if they still had not discovered the Demon King's weakness? Despite the risks, the hero rushes forward with a furious roar, his eyes fixed firmly on the target, pouring all the remaining crumbs of strength into this single desperate charge. The battle ignites with furious intensity. Team members throw themselves into the fray, dodging shards of crystalline stone that shatter and scatter across the battlefield. Amid the chaos, the leader turns to his companion, his voice tense as he declares that the current crisis leaves no room for calculated strategy. They must act right now or lose everything. He looks with wide-open eyes, fear racing through his mind. They are acting prematurely. The ancient monarch mocks their straightforwardness, calling it foolishness, and the young strategist fixes his gaze firmly on the trembling vulnerability. In the giant's chest flickers a core, pulsing with dark energy embedded within him. Ignoring the risk, the swordsman abruptly lunges forward, his cloak billowing behind him. The monarch disdainfully calls this attempt feeble, but the warrior's resolve only strengthens. He roars a challenge and prepares to strike. It transforms into a blurred trail of movement, weaving through the air at such speed that the eye cannot follow. Every move is deliberate, a barely noticeable plan to bypass the giant's massive defenses. With a sudden shout, he summons specialized equipment. His hand darts forward like a viper to snatch the shining artifact from the monarch's chest. The strike is not steel but a precise magical theft that completely confounds the enemy. The thief warrior swiftly flies back, tightly clutching the stolen prize in his hand. Behind him, the former mighty ruler collapses, breathing painfully as his very source of power is torn away. From the side, the strategist can only silently watch as the dust begins to settle. The formidable enemy still stands, but he is clearly shaking, his aura twitching after the audacious robbery. He watches as the fallen monarch convulsively coughs and releases a final mocking laugh, blood darkly staining his beard. The dying king twists his lips. Even death will change nothing, for his end is only the prologue to a cycle they cannot break. As the king's form begins to dissolve into shimmering embers, his last words hang in the ira-chilling promise that another demon king will inevitably rise to replace him. The horned youth freezes, staring intently at the fading remnants, and skeptically asks whether such a prophecy truly holds weight. But his companion only snorts disdainfully. With a cold, arrogant smile, the thief declares that if another king ever appears, he will just as easily cut them all down. The remains of the physical form of Dark Ruler dissolve into a cloud of ash and light, leaving the throne room empty. Looking around the place where his greatest enemy once stood, he casually remarks that this whole adventure turned out to be much easier than he expected. When the tension of the battle finally subsides, the squad gathers again among the ruins. The horned youth exhales with relief. They have snatched victory. But the thief immediately turns his sharp gaze on him and demands to answer what he was doing in those last minutes of the fight. In response, he raises a dark, faceted crystal that flickers in the dim light. He simply says that he accidentally stepped on this object while chaos spread around. At that very moment, the thief snatches the reward from his hands, his face twisted in a grimace of contempt as he mocks the young man for his lucky tricks, reproaching him. He pretends to be a collector while the rest of the company risk their lives in the heat of battle. Despite the harsh words, he looks at the new treasury with clear interest, while the rest of the companions simply watch. The great warrior laughs boldly as if amused by the quarrel between the two, while the immediate danger recedes. He snorts disdainfully, his eyes fill with cold contempt as he looks down on his companion, and contemptuously declares that such a treasure is completely useless for someone like Keith, who can only stare back silently, choking on sweaty, angry frustration. Turning his back, the leader sharply and impatiently tugs at his gloves, then walks away. Behind him, Kit remains deeply settled on the cold stone floor, a lonely figure left after his leader's disdain. Sitting still and drowned in his own thoughts, he feels the silence cut through by a gentle voice, and at that moment, a small support appears. He looks up as Mari approaches, but the bitter realization still spins in his head. His efforts and all the trials he endures are completely unnecessary to those who follow him. She settles down next to him, and in her gaze there is softness and compassion. Her presence sharply contrasts with the roughness of the others. It gives a rare sip of calm in the crowd of their path. Wearing a calming smile, she tells him that the day will come when everyone will recognize the true value of his contribution to the party. He just looks at her in surprise, eyes wide open, as he processes her unexpected kindness. A loud, demanding cry of a warrior tears the silent seat, hovers over them, and sprinkles impatient condemnation. He barks at them to stop talking and get out of here, and on the ground, a young man, choking on words, quickly and awkwardly apologizes. Before standing up and joining the group, he said a quiet word of thanks to his only ally. Nearby, the warrior continued muttering under his breath, his face twisted in a contemptuous grimace as he threw one last quiet insult at the one he considered a thief. Stepping back, he finds a shred of relief in the thought that her understanding is enough for him. Yet doubt still lies like a shadow, a quiet conviction in his heart that the day of true recognition she promised will remain a dream that will never truly come true. He clasped his hands, pressing them together, feeling the weight of the moment as they prepared to leave the inner sanctuary of the ruined fortress. While the rest of the group was already looking ahead, Meralda complained of exhaustion and begged to be taken home. Gelman, however, insisted. First, search the fortress and retrieve everything left of the trophies. They spent those hours prowling the dark corridors, until Gelmi finally came across a small, promising box hidden in a corner. Despite the high expectations weighing heavily on the fortress of the Demon King, he noticed how little they had actually found there, and decided that the hoard was too small for such a legendary place. When the journey back began, all the physical burden fell on Kayeth's shoulders. Gel mocked him and declared, since Kayeth didn't even take part in the fight with the Demon King, the least he could do was carry all the luggage while Mari watched anxiously. She asked if he was holding up somehow. Later their path led straight to the gates of Elm, a bustling city, where the news of their victory had already begun to spread among the inhabitants. He stood proudly before the gathered crowd, basking in their admiration, while they doubted whether it was truly they who defeated the Demon King, and their shouts echoed through the streets like an echo. While the heroes' greetings were in full swing, Jelms finally suggested they divide the loot just nearby, in the kitchen. The local women were busy with their daily chores and did not know what exactly had caused the internal discord within their group. He stands before the flickering piles of loot and decides which treasures to take for himself. The second part of the company freezes in anticipation as the division of the Demon King's hoard begins. The air buzzes with the promise of wealth. He begins distributing the loot. Heavy sacks of gold and jewels he hands over to Mari, Zatu, and Meraldi. Each of them gratefully accepts their share, and joy flashes on their faces from the wealth they earned during their journey. Turning to Kit, he offers him a single miserable trifle as a reward for hard work. The blatant injustice of the distribution immediately causes an uproar. Kit, without taking his eyes off his small item, freezes in amazement while the rest silently watch. When the young man's shock turns into protest, Meralda steps forward and coldly justifies the decision. The reward must correspond to the amount of effort spent. She remains unyielding, and Mari watches the conversation with growing anxiety. Noticing Mary's hesitation, she suggests, if Mary feels so sorry for Kifas, then she should be the one to share her own things with him. The advice leaves Mary momentarily speechless, caught between her sympathy and the value of her own honestly earned rewards. Seized by a sudden decision, she stretches out her hand and grasps with her fingers the dark, heavy fabric of the Demon King's cloak. Then she suddenly turns to Keith and presses the legendary garment on him, insisting that he take the cloak as his rightful share. Keith frantically argues that he cannot accept such a valuable relic, especially since it was the best artifact they managed to find, but she does not back down. Her conviction only grows stronger as soon as she looks him in the eyes and says with fierce sincerity, he deserves much more than just a trifle. Impressed by her unexpected kindness, Kit finally accepts the gift, eyes wide open, filled with both gratitude and newfound respect. Two heavy wooden mugs clunk dully together thud. Foamy ale splashes over the rim, and the hall follows with loud laughter and cheerful shouts. They celebrate victory within the loud walls of the local tavern, air thick with the smell of roasted meat and fermented grain. Gelman's Zot is in a wonderful mood. Their laughter rumbles over the noise of the crowd as they recount their antics. Nearby, Meralda joins the merriment. Meanwhile, Mari watches with a gentle smile, the company finally finding a moment of rest after the long journey. As the night stretches on, she finds herself in a bar and her face softens, becoming calm and contemplative. Kate approaches. His presence sharply contrasts with the noisy merriment behind. He speaks to her, perhaps expressing gratitude or sharing a private thought, and she listens attentively. Her eyes are wide open, a mix of surprise and curiosity as the tavern's clamor fades into the background. Kayeth's boots decisively step past the wooden sign hanging outside the building. Inside, he sits by the window, not taking his eyes off what is beyond it while pondering the situation. With heavy exhaustion, he realizes this exhausting journey is finally coming to an end. Clenching his fist, he mutters that this was the most disgusting adventure of his entire life, and that he can't wait to get rid of his companions as soon as they return to the kingdom. His gaze narrows as he recalls the exact terms of the deal that brought him here. In his memory, he stands before the royal throne, boldly demanding, if he manages to kill the Demon King, the Aldoberg Thieves Guild will immediately grant full immunity. The proposal instantly provokes the court's anger. The high official sharply snarls that such a demand is absurd, and that the High Council will never allow the guild to keep the wealth they stole from the nobility. But at his audacious demand, the king wearily waves his handon. The room falls silent. He admits, the threat of the Demon King is far more important than the trouble caused by a gang of thieves. The king gives his word. If the mission is successful, the guild will be pardoned and allowed to return to the kingdom. The monarch's promise still lingers in his mind, even when the companion offers him food right now. He accepts the dish and says a polite thank you, but the burden of the exhausting journey still weighs heavily on him. You cannot forget how they looked down on him from the very beginning. And even now, the echoes of their insults ring in his head, a constant reminder of how they humiliated him for his past as a thief and treated him as nothing more than ordinary trash. He recalls those terrifying moments on the road, how he was used again and again as bait against monsters. Memories of clashes where death was near flash before his eyes, a bitter reminder of his place in the squad. He chokes under the weight of these memories and pure exhaustion from the march and falls onto the bed. He mumbles something through his teeth, too much, everything, the end. The body finally gives in, fatigue takes over. While he rests alone, his comrades Jelm, Zot, and Meralda burst out of the tavern and seize victory. Zot, clearly quite drunk, loudly demands where Mari disappeared to, while Meralda and Jelm, leaning on each other, bask in the warmth of their freshly won feasts. Trinity continues to spread drunken jokes. Djelm jokingly flirts with Meralda, and it only amuses her. Their light, carefree wave suddenly breaks when they notice a lonely, mysterious figure in a hood nearby. She is intently watching them. The figure asks if they really look like ordinary residents to this group, causing Jelev to blurt out a confused answer. And under his hood, Kit, hidden by a cloak, notes that these guys still wouldn't recognize his former allies. Before the tension could explode, an official envoy from the king approaches them holding a sealed letter. Helm, still riding high after his victory, freezes. He does not mind aloud reflections. Is this a formal recognition of their triumphant victory over the Demon King? He raises the document but gives a strict sole order. The thief Keith is strictly forbidden to open it. The group falls silent, and the weight of this specific prohibition hangs in the air. Observing the exchange from afar, the envoy finds the very essence of the request quite interesting. A barely noticeable, knowing smile slides across his lips as he contemplates the consequences of the king's secret order. Meralda leans closer, her curiosity ignited by the parchment in Joan's hands. She directly asks what exactly is written in the royal message. Her eyes do not leave the paper. He is silent for a moment before handing her the letter and inviting her to look at the words herself. A barely noticeable, conscious smile barely moves on his lips, as he says that the instructions are quite interesting. Nearby, Keith wakes up after a deep, alcoholic oblivion. His eyelids twitch, and his eyes open as muffled sounds of conversation come through the walls. Outside, the trio prepares to depart, repeating their determination. Joan, with a sharp smile, announces that it is time to carry out the king's orders. Her excitement is almost visible in her eyes. Zot freezes by the wooden door, presses his ear to the narrow crack, and peeks in to check on his companion. The heavy door creaks open as he and Jelm enter the small room. Keith sits upright on the edge of the bed. Jelm greets him and notices that he is not asleep, and Keith admits, the commotion outside finally broke his sleep. He raises his gaze to them, his face tired, as if after a sleepless night and heavy drinking, and he immediately notices how strange it is that this company is looking for him and for anything at all. He stood over the man who had just woken up and looked in a way that made his face unreadable, silently offering an empty apologetic phrase for the intrusion. He noticed that the current atmosphere was too heavy for a usual morning greeting, and his presence cast a long shadow over the room. His gaze sharpened, his eyes narrowed, and in this predatory tension he felt a sudden, incredible surge of murderous rage. He thought, petty anger can still be endured, but such a level of raw bloodthirstiness is something else entirely. It was a sign of the bloody work that awaited ahead. The young thief sat down, reacting to the eerie atmosphere. While his thoughts wildly raced, he greeted the newcomer with a cautious nod. He demanded to know why this confrontation happened at such an unexpected hour, because he felt life was about to change forever. He did not start with small talk and explained. The king thought that the thief, as part of the hero's band, was a stain on his reputation that needed to be erased. When the thief realized he was trapped, the walls seemed to close in around him, understood that there was no way out of this royal order. This revelation awakened in him a bitter memory of the king, and the thief finally realized the true treachery of their contract. He understood. The king never intended to grant them freedom. If the thief dies, the contract simply loses its power, and execution remains a convenient solution for the crown. With cold, final certainty, the enforcer snatched the blade, declaring that his order was to destroy the vile thief once and for all. He allowed the doomed man to accumulate as much hatred as he wanted. This would change nothing before the king's unconditional command. Despite the threat hanging over him, the thief's eyes flashed with sudden, desperate determination, braced himself for the blow, ready to face it. He was not going to simply accept the fate the king had prepared for him in advance. His body tensed for the final act of defiance. Seeing a spark of resistance, the great warrior nearby grinned and immediately understood. The thief clearly did not intend to surrender without a fight. He prepared for the inevitable clash, acknowledging the stubbornness of the man who refused to become a silent victim. He watches as Djelm notices the desperate gap, suddenly jumps forward and believes that this is his only way to escape. Suddenly the thief's eyes widen in pure shock. A dazzling flash of energy bursts right in his path and instantly stops all his movement. This sudden intervention came from Merelda. She disrupted a devastating explosion of fire, and the corridor was engulfed in a roar of heat and smoke. Jelm barely managed to rush back. Thoughts were racing as he realized that his own ally had shot at him without any pause. When the smoke began to clear, he convulsively tried to stay on his feet, and thoughts raced as if a feeling of betrayal had just ignited within him. Kate sees a moment of confusion. His blade flashes as he presses the attack on shaky legs that have not yet straightened. Before he could recover, the massive figure Zot crashed down from above, blocking any remaining path of retreat. The warrior laughed, calling him a little rat, and made it clear there would be no escape from his reach. The intensity of the magical explosion scorched the stone walls black and caused them to crumble, a mute testament to the deadly power just unleashed. When the dust finally settled, the group stood over their fallen comrade. Zot casually warned Merelda about her excessive strength. He said she almost caught him in the explosion too, and she, a little embarrassed, apologized for her zeal. Glancing at the defeated man lying on the floor, the warrior just shrugged and brushed off the danger. After all, it all turned out well in the end. He couldn't resist remarking that they were all such daredevils, though he admitted it seemed they had a bit of fun mocking the thief. He lay there, blood oozed down his face, and his eyes blazed with a desperate, defiant fire despite the crushing defeat. With a sudden burst of energy, the wounded man lunged forward, still not fully conscious, and his former allies were completely caught off guard while he, limping, got to his feet. He, knowing no fear, slipped past them, and Iralda sharply warned, "Beware," just as he rushed close through the nearest window and jumped into the open air. A guttural scream tore from his throat as he sprang into motion, running on the ground. The burning pain from the burns on his back flared with every frantic, agonizing step. Turning over on the move, he made his way through the noisy streets, clutching his side. Everything swam before his eyes as he pushed through the bewildered crowd of townsfolk who could only gape in stunned silence. From above, his retreating figure was just a speck, a desperate shadow darting through the heart of the bustling market, in a last attempt to survive. Turning back to their fight, the swordsmen watched the distant chaos, and with barely perceptible, chilled respect noted how quickly the thief fled despite his condition. His companions remained indifferent, but considering they had already dealt him a mortal blow, they decided, somewhere in the wilderness he would die alone anyway. They left him to die, surely the wounds were fatal. But Jelm still drags his broken body through the mud. His back is a ruin of torn fabric and blood as the rain begins to fall. His vision blurs, and his breathing cuts into his lungs with ragged, desperate spasms. Every breath is a struggle against the encroaching darkness and the burning pain radiating from his back. Eventually, he lacks the strength to stand upright. His shoulder hits the rough wall, and then, before he regains consciousness, he helplessly slips and falls to the ground in a quiet alley. Lying on this cold stone that soaks up his blood, he feels a chilling clarity. Might these worthless corners of the city become his final refuge? His fingers weakly cling to the dirt, and his thoughts drift towards his comrades and the uncertain future that awaits their gang without him, without his helm to guide them through the coming storm. He completely sinks down, pressing his face into the wet earth, raging at his own weakness, while from afar a familiar, frightened voice begins to call, uttering someone's name. It is Mari who finds him. Her eyes widen in horror as she sees his mangled body, then she immediately falls to her knees and directs restorative magic into his torn wounds. She continues to focus her power while he barely manages a weak word of thanks. But as soon as she urgently asks what happened and offers to find the rest of the group, he weakly extends a hand to stop her, begging to stay hidden. He leans back against the cold stone wall, and his voice breaks into a strained whisper. He begs Mari to keep their meeting a secret. He insists that no one must know, that she found him and tried to mend his broken state. Yet even when she looks at him with wide, confused eyes, pleading for an explanation, he is not ready to even guess why it happened. Noticing her hesitation, he tightens his cloak. His fingers clench so hard that his knuckles turn white as he warns of terrible consequences. If those hunting him learn of her involvement, he explains to Grimm with ruthless certainty, they will not hesitate to kill her as well. The thought makes her tremble with fear. The weight of his words proves too heavy for her, and she bursts out in a scream of desperate denial, unwilling to believe the danger is so absolute. He tries to encourage her somewhat, urging her to return to the safety of the hotel while promising that a little rest will be enough for him to get back on his feet. She had no intention of agreeing. Her voice rises as she argues that they must return together. She emphasizes, even despite her recovery, he has lost too much blood to leave him alone. But he cuts her off with a sharp, commanding shout of her name and instantly grabs her wrists, repeating his demand, let her go and he will save. With such intensity that left no room for objections, he leans forward, his eyes blaze with desperate, urgent need. He orders her to follow his instructions flawlessly no matter what happens and whatever they demand of her. She must obey everything they want to say without questions and without any resistance. Under his resolve, she finally looks away, her shoulders slump as the reality of the event sinks into her mind. In a thin, hollow voice, she whispers that she understands and agrees to return to the inn alone, leaving him in the shadow of the alley. But before she manages to leave, she reaches out to him one last time. Her hands move toward him with a final, lingering intention. He flinches slightly, startled by the sudden movement, as she tries to give one more portion of care before their fourth parting. When she finally turns to go, she throws a farewell wish for his safety and calls out to Kit, take care of yourself. He sits in the deepening cold, his breath faltering as the frost seeps into his very bones, watching her figure until she disappears into the distance. He curls up in the shadow. From the bitter cold, his body is torn by a slight tremor. When the footsteps of his comrades disappear, he whispers the last word of thanks into the empty air, acknowledging the help she provided. Watching her silhouette fade into the distance, he remembers how she was always his support. Suddenly, a wave of dreadful dizziness overwhelms him, his vision dims and the world spins. Through the haze comes a ghostly voice calling him a noble youth without a name and beckoning from the darkness. His eyes open wide and he slashes a sideways glance, pure distrust. From the shadows rises a gigantic crystalline figure. Above him looms the commanding presence of the Demon King, radiating an aura of ancient power that paralyzes him with shock. The ghost is silent. Its gaze is fixed on the trembling youth. Kate stands, her gaze fixed on the faces of those he once called friends, Jelmy, Zot, Meralda, and Mari. He tries to harden his heart, telling himself that now they mean nothing to him. But the news that the Demon King survived shakes him to the bone. He was sure the ancient ruler was dead. He watches as blood streams from the mouth of the Demon King, a sign that the monarch has suffered terrible wounds. Noticing the breach, Keith is already thinking of using it to escape, but his thoughts are interrupted by a loud, thunderous declaration. Despite his injuries, the Demon King proclaims that his lineage never truly dies. An ancient creature explains that its existence is an endless karmic punishment, a curse where death remains unknown to it. It says its power flows endlessly through its blood, a legacy stretching back to ancient times. Then he shifts his piercing gaze to Keith and calls him a nameless creature who has spent his whole life running away from everything. The young thief shouts back, defending his actions as a natural way of livelihood, and proudly calls himself Keith Aldoberg. But the Demon King just brushes it off. Recalling how Keith betrayed, fled from knights, abandoned the Adventurers Guild, and ultimately ran from the heroes who came for his life. The monarch approaches closer. His presence suffocates, as he repeatedly insists that the Demon King cannot die. He challenges the boy and asks if he will truly maintain his identity as Keith Aldoberg in the face of such an inevitable impostor. He concludes with the words that there is no escape from this circle. They are only vessels for the power that passes from one to the next. Kate can only silently freeze in horror as the weight of this revelation sinks into him. He lies motionless and looks up at the high, vaulted ceiling in the silence of the hall, where massive stone columns stretch into the darkness. He was still trembling from the revelation of the Demon King, frozen motionless on the coal floor, his breathing shallow as he tried to digest the burden of the curse. A sharp realization jerked him upward. He opened his eyes and looked around the unfamiliar surroundings in fear. In front of him stretched a row of colossal glass vessels in each. The motionless bodies of his comrades were frozen, preserved like exhibits in a grim gallery. Choking on what he saw, he sank back onto the tile, and his voice echoed through the empty chamber as he desperately questioned how he ended up here. Bitter resentment began to boil inside him, and his face twisted with memories of all he had endured only to once again confront his cruel reality. He finally sprang to his feet, shouting all his torments at the indifferent columns, demanding answers. Could it be that his desperate attempts to save his family through theft were truly a sin worthy of his half-dead existence? When his echo faded, his attention was drawn to a tall, ornate mirror nearby, a relic that revealed the true nature and status of anyone who stood before it. He stared intently into the mirror of discernment, his eyes wide with embarrassment as strange symbols began to flare across its surface. In the reflection was not only his face. It revealed a hidden truth that made him doubt everything he thought about himself. Only when he reached out to touch the cold glass did the text clarify the impossibility. He had earned the title Phantom Thief. It was a legendary title, the highest peak of the thief's profession, granted only to those capable of stealing anything they set their eyes on. Such an achievement was so rare that most believed it was a person. This sensational news suddenly triggered a memory of his youth in the Aldeburg thief gang. Back then, Minter once tousled his hair and spoke of unrealized potential. He encouraged him, hinting that one day he might become the new boss, a phantom thief of such a level that their gang had never seen before. Returning to the present, he sharpened his gaze. The memory collided with reality right before him, and the impact became unbearable. The mirror's glow intensified, and the inscription shifted, revealing a far more terrifying title: Demon King. It spoke of a being who brought only destruction and chaos, the Lord of Darkness destined to lead the world into utter chaos. He shuddered, and the words Demon King echoed in the silence of the hall as he looked at his own reflection and could not believe his eyes. The idea seemed impossible, a cruel joke played by a magical artifact, yet the mirror stubbornly stood its ground, like a verdict. Bitter, empty laughter bursts from him, and he mocks the absurdity of his situation, wildly waving his hand in the empty room. If he is truly a king, he thinks with manic energy, then of course he should have subjects or allies to command, not be left in this lonely, silent tomb. In response to his desperate challenge, 4 ghostly figures emerge from the light. Their outlines tremble, wrapped in an ethereal glow. They stand before him, the same heroes who were once his companions. Now they stand as silent, ghostly guards in this dark throne hall. They are overshadowed by a new, even more magnificent presence. Seat comes through the trembling veil behind him. The cat suddenly freezes. It opens its eyes wide and catches a sudden, sharp horror within itself as it senses the immense power radiating in waves from the 4 figures appearing in the mist. He is paralyzed by the realization. Even with new titles, these legendary warriors can end his life in an instant. Cold sweat breaks out on his forehead, and in panic he calculates his chances, convinced that these 4 heavenly kings will more likely become his executioners than allies. He feels his end is near, and this is a deep trouble. With trembling fingers, he grasps the edge of his royal cloak, and his heart beats against his ribs like a trapped bird. The weight of his situation presses like a tangible burden, and with chilling certainty he knows, one wrong step or a crack in his flawless image and a fate of painful torture awaits him. Jinru arrives first, a formidable swordsman with a mystical mark etched on his forehead. Almost immediately after him comes Diana, a young recruit, delicate in appearance, and her clothing, carefully folded, hides her hidden, incredibly strong power. Standing beside them are Lyra Quariata, a dark sorceress with an aura of ancient mystery, and a jewel on her forehead, and Victor, a marksman who carries himself with the quiet, deadly confident assurance of an experienced hunter beneath his fedora. Instead of the expected attack, they simultaneously fall to their Nisa display of complete submission. Their voices rise in unison, declaring that they have gathered here only to serve their new lord. He stares at them, his mind buzzing with thoughts, how to reconcile their submissive posture with the terrifying power they possess. With a shaky breath, he orders them to raise their heads and still cannot believe that these legendary figures are truly his allies, not a new wave of enemies. While they stand, the young summoner Diana approaches him trembling and asks if he is truly the one they seek. He tries to assure her that he is only a member of the hero squad, but she does not believe him, begging for mercy if he intends to take revenge. The dark mage Alira quickly intervenes, dismissing his words, insisting that his physical transformation, dazzling horns, and royal cloak is undeniable proof that he is the next demon king. And when he cautiously asks if they still hold grudges over his role in the previous king's death, she explains, "The matter is complicated, and revenge would be an insult to the natural cycle of power in the position he now rightfully holds." He stands among his new subordinates. A brief wave of uncertainty passes through his thoughts. Does this sudden shift in loyalty truly guarantee his safety? Yet Jinru breaks the silence and notes that one single specific detail still troubles him. The warrior leans forward, his third eye presses against the new lord, and he asks why they have not yet been dissolved. This unfamiliar demand throws the young king off balance. His embarrassment is as heavy as the question itself. While he processes this, Diana explains, "Usually the demon king would simply get rid of those who failed and gather a new group of subordinates." Victor adds that former rulers often dissolved the servants of their predecessor into raw magic, and they fully expected such a fate after their recent defeat. Having listened to their grim expectations, he admits that he has no idea how to perform such a trick and feels no desire to do so. Instead, he gives them a second chance, hinting that their defeat probably taught them invaluable lessons, and this unexpected leniency brings tears to Diana's eyes. Stunned by his kindness, four subordinates swear unconditional loyalty. Alira and Victor express deep relief, while Jinru and Diana vow to repay this mercy with their souls. He looks at them in response. The weight of their fervent loyalty and the title he now bears clearly affect his self-control. Noticing sudden paleness, the young girl asks if he is ill. He weakly replies that he is simply suffering from a lack of blood. Nothing stops. Hirsch falls to one knee and eagerly asks for his first official order as their ruler. She misinterprets his condition as a craving for violence. She believes he seeks immediate bloodshed, and her face twists into a mad smile. Nearby, Victor draws a weapon, and Jinru prepares for battle, and all three are eager to prove their worth through fights. She leaned forward with a crazy, wide-open smile. Her face flashed with dark excitement as she asked if they would finally go rob the city like before. Below, Kate broke out in a cold sweat. His face was pure desperate hopelessness as he feverishly tried to stop the terrible misunderstanding. He croaked that he was speaking literally, but his body physically had almost no blood left, and his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The bloodlust of his subordinates did not subside. They were pondering how much slaughter would be needed to satisfy what their new masters, as they imagined, desired. Kate, feeling her strength draining after the recent trial, asks Emil to return her power. One of his companions says that meat would be the best option to overcome her lack of blood. In a moment, they find themselves under the luxurious chandelier of the large banquet hall. They sit around the long table. He secretly watches the silent servants and asks if they are really people. Diana confirms his suspicion. She explains that these are golems which she summoned herself. He admits that he is impressed. He had no idea before that such a place exists in the Demon King's castle. While the group begins the meal, Alira enthusiastically praises the quality of the food. Diana notes that most of the castle rooms are inaccessible without her specific etherealizability. She explains that usually a magical crystal helps to move around, but this time she had to bypass the locks manually. This mention prompts him to start talking about the missing artifact. In response to her explanation, he reveals a terrible truth. The crystal he supposedly took from his predecessor, Dijalm, was stolen during their meeting. Having just heard this, she clenches her jaws in a fit of silent rage and curses people for their thievery. Feeling her sharp reaction, he asks if the value of this crystal is really that great. She confirms this in a sharp tone, explaining that the jewel is needed not only to enter the inner sanctuaries of the castle, but also grants half the power that the Demon King must use. Having listened to her explanation, he felt the revelation strike his body like a physical blow. He understood. In his current state, he had only half the strength of the previous ruler, and now he was mortally vulnerable if the heroes struck again. He listens while Diana sprinkles words of support, reminding him that despite his current condition, his previous life as a human gave him unique enhancements to the Phantom Thief's work. She goes even further and hints, with these innate abilities he can not only match but eventually surpass the power of the former Demon King. At these words, the other council members fall silent, lost in thought. With the awareness of his own potential, he is momentarily paralyzed by silence. The job description, which offers perfect transformations and penetration without any effort, sounds like a power from his wildest dreams. Sensing his interest, Diana suggests going to the armory as soon as they finish eating. He agrees, understanding. As long as he still retains a human profession in that world, finding equipment that complements these very skills is a logical next step to secure his position. In a moment, two walk down a luxurious, sterile corridor. The walls are covered with glass showcases, and in each one is a relic of incredible power. As they pass by the display cases, Diana explains, "These treasures are the personal property of Demon King, and he can take whatever he wishes." Yet she notes that legendary items like Heaven's Split Crown might not be the best choice for his covert style. He fixates his gaze on the endless collection and feels helpless when he admits he has no way to learn either the function or the value of any of these artifacts. Diana instantly offers a way out. She says that in his class, there is a skill called Praising Eye. It will activate only if he focuses on his intention and names it. Taking her advice to heart, he focused his gaze on the objects before him, and his pupil shifted with a movement as soon as he summoned the power of the eye that evaluates to reveal the secrets hidden in the armor. He asks Diana if she can see the text floating, but she confirms this vision is only his. He shifts his gaze to a strange artifact, the Nightfall Lamp. It can envelop the world in darkness, but in return it takes magical energy. Continuing the path through the storage, they pass by a simple-looking eyeglass lens lying on a pedestal. This monocle of confidence is far from ordinary. It allows the wearer to see hidden statistics and things of any target. Its insight sharpens with each use. The realization of his own potential strikes. Like a phantom thief, he has a creepy ability to steal everything that falls within his sight. He stares intently and thoughts whirl through the consequences of such power. He concludes these treasures are powerful yet amazingly suited exactly to his needs. And he decides, for him, this is the only way forward. He turns to his companion, calls her by name and says he wants to test his newly found abilities. While he concentrates, her summoner status clearly appears before him with commands for hypnosis and secretarial duties. Without saying a word, he extends his hand and gently lifts her chin with his fingers so that she looks him in the eyes. She gasps for air and her cheeks flush a deep red as she looks at him, stunned into silence. The sudden closeness throws her off balance. She stammers and frantically asks what exactly he intends to test on her. Understanding how his gesture was perceived, he panics and pulls back, his face burning as he tries to find words to apologize. He leaned closer, curiosity mixed with mischief in his eyes, and asked the young enchantress what she would test next. Diana, fired up with excitement, awaited his next request. He advised her to summon a monster so he could examine it. He wanted to see how her powers worked. In response, she sharply struck a dramatic pose and confidently shouted, summoning her special familiar. For a moment, everything froze and she rustled nervously, pleading for a little more time. Suddenly, a dark viscous mass began to seep from the floor, but he quickly intervened, waved his hands, stopped the process, and apologized for teasing her with such a demand. When the tension from the failed summoning subsided, Elira slipped into the room and her voice dripped with admiration for the equipment he had gathered. She marveled at the monocle he wore, stating that it suited him perfectly and was an appropriate accessory for a person of his level. Intrigued by her praise, he focused the monocle lens on her and immediately encountered an unexpected discovery. The device showed not just indicators. It displayed her exact physical measurements, and the bust size made him freeze for a moment at the sheer detail of that information. Noticing his distraction, Jinru advised him to continue testing the device's capabilities on everyone nearby. His gaze slid toward Marie, and even through her modest attire, the monocle only confirmed his suspicions. Her figure was no less impressive. Because of this, he looked away and felt a slight embarrassment. Switching back to the main point, he laid out before everyone his ultimate goal, the liberation of the Aldoberg thief gang from the depths of Tristram prison. For the upcoming mission, he set strict rules of conduct. Act without lethal consequences and avoid any unnecessary harm to bystanders. Others also started discussing logistics. Jinru noted that his own too conspicuous appearance made him unsuitable for a covert operation. Victor agreed and added, The loud crack of his firearm would immediately wake the guards, so sneaking quietly would not work for him either. Understanding that a different approach was needed, Alira offered her help, stating that her versatility as a dark mage could prove extremely useful. Diana followed her. Her ability to summon creatures, she said, could become a unique and fast means of transportation for the entire group. Kif turns to Alira, asks if she really understood his order. She joyfully talks for another minute about how she will kill all the people in one stroke, but he firmly reminds her, attacking them excessively is strictly forbidden. She immediately yields, though her crazy energy and bloodthirsty smile do not disappear when she acknowledges his torch. She leans in very close and gently addresses him, calling him Her Majesty, while he tries to organize their departure. He suggests going straight to the destination, but she stops him halfway and stubbornly insists. No need for such a boring route when she can offer a much faster option. She orders him to close his eyes and imagine in the smallest details the exact place he wants to reach. While he is lost in thought, the young summoner nearby begins to scold the dark mage for behavior that is all too familiar and brazen towards their leader, but the warnings seem to go in one ear and out the other. He focuses on the memory of a sterile, barred corridor in prison. It gives him mental support for the spell. Nearby, a dark mage stands ready. Her power already begins to stir as the target place takes shape in his imagination. She begins a rhythmic incantation, speaking of steps through fleeting illusions and paths in the eternal flow of time. And with a final commanding cry, she calls the gate to connect their present location with the heart of the prison. Before them rises a swirling vortex of darkness. Suddenly, with furious force, it confuses him. She announces that the passage is ready but warns it will last only 30 seconds. Everyone must move as quickly as possible before the connection fails. He calls the young summoner to hurry so they are not left behind while the team prepares to step into the void. With a common goal, they prepare a breakthrough through the prison walls and begin the rescue mission. Their king is ahead. The cold stone walls of the dungeon corridor were silent. The only light pierced from above through a small barred opening. A heavy boot struck the floor with force, and the roar echoed down the empty corridor. Heath led the way through the dim corridor, and his companions stayed close as they made their way through the labyrinth and the building. Reaching the sealed compartment, he stretched out his hand and activated his specialized abilities, commanding the mechanism to unlock. When the path finally opened, he turned to his allies to coordinate the next move. He ordered Diana to remain at their current position on standby to cover the rear, and entrusted Eliro to accompany him further into the building. To keep them safe, he activated another of his phantom thief skills, releasing a wave of energy to scan the surroundings and find hidden threats or passages. The magical pulse spread outward in waves, revealing the intricate layout of the floors above and below, and outlining the entire fortress in a single bright flash of insight. He notes that his new Phantom Thief skill has an effective range of about 100 trella, so he can see a guard standing in the corridors ahead. Focusing his intent, he sharpens the limits of his senses. His gaze intensifies as the prison layout becomes clear. The scan activates immediately. He finds prisoners behind heavy iron bars, and their figures emerge in his mind as glowing silhouettes. Among them, he recognizes the exhausted face of the Demon King. He sits hunched, pressed against the cold stone wall of his cell. Seeing the former lord in such a state, and a poignant memory of happier times immediately surfaces. He sat among his comrades Jelm, Sat, Meralda, and Mari, drinking with them and laughing after a successful mission. He shakes off the burden of the past. He narrows his eyes. The determination to save his old friends burns brighter than ever. Returning to the present, he quietly warns Elira about a guard post around the next corner, but she calmly steps forward and asks him to leave it to her. With a light gesture, she lifts the paralyzing fog and gust of wind, quietly disarming the guard before he can raise the alarm, and does it in a way he silently approves. She watches as Kid approaches the fallen guard and says a few words of praise to her for how quickly and effectively her magic neutralized the threat. He steps over the unconscious man and watches to make sure the guard does not wake up for a long time. In the end, he throws out a cold phrase that the light will go out. Delving into the dungeon, the pair finally reach the heavy iron bars of the main holding chamber where others are kept. He prepares to bypass the security, relying on his specialized Phantom Thief abilities to pick the lock. A barely noticeable ethereal glow bursts from his fingers as he focuses energy on the mechanism and commands the doors to open. A loud, sharp metallic click and the heavy gates slide forward, revealing the entrance. Inside, the former Demon King shudders from restless sleep and groans as soon as he begins to sense strangers in his chamber. He is immediately silenced. A glove presses a finger to his lips, ordering complete silence until the rest of the guards notice their presence. They avert their gaze in disbelief. Eyes widen as soon as they see the horns and the monocle he now wears. One of them shouts in shock, asking what happened to him, but he brushes off their misunderstanding. Hastily cuts off. Explanation later, the main thing now to break out of the prison dungeon immediately. He stands before the former ruler, and the latter finally comprehends the full depth of the betrayal. The old man understands. The king's promise of forgiveness was only an empty trick to lure them into a trap and keep them captive endlessly. When the realization finally dawns, the rest rush forward together to greet their savior. They marvel at how much he has changed and notice. While they had not seen each other, his hair has grown. Among the crowd is the young girl Luca Bims, who rejoices at his return, her eyes wide open with relief. She lifts her gaze to him with a radiant, tearful smile and admits, she never doubted that he would come for them. Her faith did not waver throughout the long captivity, and now, seeing him the fulfillment of her most cherished hope. Because of her unwavering devotion, he gently steers the conversation toward escape, insisting, they must break free immediately. When they ask where he got the new horns and what happened to the Demon King, he only says it's a long story and she will have to wait for a safer moment. While feverishly preparing to escape, the former Demon King glanced at the beautiful woman standing next to their savior, leaned closer, and with curiosity, asked who she was, this stunning beauty who accompanied him deep into the dungeon. He introduces her with a hint of hesitation, calling her something like a subordinate. In response, she puts on a self-satisfied, pleased expression, and as if enjoying the attention in her new role, hums a playful melody. They move through dark corridors, running past the crumpled corpse of a guard slumped against the wall. When someone in the group asks what happened to the man, the answer is simple. He was broken by the powerful magic of the dark mage, neutralized before he could raise the alarm. When the path is cleared, the group moves as a single whole through the stone corridors. The burden of long captivity begins to lift as they follow their incredible guide and his mysterious companion toward the light of the surface. He immediately extinguishes Lyra's idea to open another portal, his voice calm, firm, without hesitation. She was burning with the desire to use magic again, but he knew the risks of their current situation and did not allow her to continue. Through the narrow space, he explains, such gates would be dangerous not only by themselves, they would also attract unnecessary attention with their winds and lightning. The dark mage only frowns disappointedly in response to his sensible caution, realizing that her plan was too risky. In an instant, he activates one of his specialized skills, gathers attention and scans the nearby surroundings. The scan confirms success. It finds a back gate that leads directly outside, although at the same time it shows that 4 guards are standing nearby. He shifts his gaze to the young summoner. He asks Diana if she can call an animal capable of transporting the entire group. She nods confidently, she can. However, she says that the creature she has in mind is very large. It is better to call it once they have lifted the siege from the castle wall to avoid getting trapped. To the threat, the guard Alira responds with deadly grace. Her dark magic weaves into the air and neutralizes the guards before they can raise the alarm. When they emerge into the cool night air under the light of the August moon, the burden of their imprisonment finally begins to lift. Former captives burst out with quiet, joyful exclamations, savoring the first breath of fresh air as if it had lasted an eternity. He watches them closely, and with a heavy heart notices. During their time in the dungeon, his comrades have become so exhausted and weak their tattered clothes hang from their bony bodies. He silently listened as exhausted, hoarse laughter burst from the old monarch's lips. The face was wrinkled from the burden of his imprisonment. But with a grim smile, the old man spoke about the meager rations they had to endure, only 2 bowls of thin broth and a piece of hard bread daily. And he warned that such a diet would eventually make anyone as thin and feeble as he himself was. When the squad moved to the edge of the castle territory, the former ruler lingered. The dark cloak barely fluttered in the night air as he looked back at the stone fortress that had become his cage. He stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed on the clusters of towers ahead. Turning to Diana, he spoke firmly and without hesitation, explaining that he still had unfinished business within these walls. He ordered her to lead the others to safety and flee without delay if anything went wrong. She voiced her concern for his safety, but it was clear had already made up his mind. Silence covered the inner courtyard. Moonlight stretched long, sharp shadows along the well-kept alleys, and the central fountain continued to splash rhythmically, unaware of the unfolding escape. In the corridors, clear traces of their passage remained. Guards lay fallen, leaning against the cold stone walls. Their weapons were thrown on the checkered floor while the group pushed deeper into the very heart of the palace. Driven by a sense of urgency, Kate dashed forward and sprinted through the long, arched gallery. His footsteps echoed faintly as he passed another unconscious figure lying senseless. In the depths of the palace, some high-ranking courtier spoke with contempt, and his voice literally dripped with disdain. He did not hide his disgust that a mere thief could walk among those destined to become great. insisting that only the revelations of the oracle would truly determine who was worthy of the title of hero and who were their true companions. His boots rhythmically clicked on the polished floor, moving coldly and deliberately toward an unknown goal. The king of men addresses his guest in a heavy voice and swears. As soon as they defeat the demon king and safely return to the kingdom, he will grant their comrades the freedom promised to them. Outside the chambers, massive boots press into the stone floor with a dull crunch as the figure approaches the royal sanctuary, measured, confident, step by step. Stands before the luxurious double doors. The cat focuses, activates the phantom thief skill for heightened hearing to eavesdrop on the private conversation unfolding inside. Inside, the court official approaches closer and admits to the king how much the very thought of that nasty thief troubles him, how often he is disgusted and finds it shameful that such a scoundrel is near a hero. The king solemnly agrees, and his face reflects the official's disgust. Suddenly the doors burst open, and the cat entered, walking confidently with a smile on his lips, casually greeting the king and the general as if he were not an uninvited guest. The official shudders in shock and panics, calling for the guards, but they do not appear. He looms over them and contemptuously asks if they looked for the guards he has already neutralized. The official, trembling with rage and fear, spits out a curse, calling him a damned monster, just realizing how easily their security was breached. Ignoring the insult, he moves at a dazzling speed, activating his swift steel skill. And bitterly thinks, without the necessary context of his specialized work knowledge, it is quite natural for them to see something monstrous in his unique abilities. Easily disarming his opponent, he also notes his strike, then sharply snatches what he came for. With a final twist, he uses his lock skill to secure the prize, and the official ultimately remains on the floor, curled up in fear. He frantically pulls the handles of the giant doors, but they do not budge as if held fast by an invisible force. Outside, the king trembles in shock and demands to know who this stranger is and what the hell he could want. Kate just stands still. His presence hangs over the room like a heavy, cold immobility. A slow, confident smile spreads across his face, a predator's expression, holding its prey exactly where it needs to. He officially calls himself Kit Aldoberg, the Phantom Thief, the Demon King. This name immediately strikes the king's heart with fear and triggers in the strategist's memory a sharp recollection of the time when they were acquainted. The monarch trembles with disbelief and asks how such a thing is even possible. Kit, with dark pleasure, notes that to be heard and remembered is an honor. After that, he states his intention with ice-breaking clarity. He has come for revenge. And disdainfully admitting that such a reason may seem too banal for their story, his gaze sharpens. Light falls on the glasses as he activates the special ability Appraising Eye. Because of this mystical vision, the powers of his opponents manifest outwardly in luminous writing. He sees. The commander has a high level of command and tactical skills, while the king himself is endowed with formidable powers of rulership and strategy. He casually throws remarks about the quality of their skills and depth of knowledge, noting that even their basic characteristics are impressive. The king, embarrassed and increasingly irritated by the second, demands an explanation of what he is talking about and cannot comprehend what force is being used against him. With cold, piercing composure, he declares, these very qualities, their strength, their power, and his firmer knowledge are what he intends to steal from them tonight. As he speaks, his hand begins to pulse with ominous dark energy, a sign that the theft is beginning and challenging the natural order. Outside, it darkens. The silent spires of the castle rise into the night sky, unaware of the titanic theft taking place within its walls. Kate returns to her companions and apologizes for the delay. It is clear that his excursion was successful, but the arrival is met with mixed feelings from the entire group. He tells Diana that exploring the castle was very pleasant and that he managed to find useful things. She looks unpleasantly impressed or simply fully focused on the matter, so she asks if the mission really succeeded. As the noise from the castle grows louder, Alira notices the increasing sound. She reminds them of their duty like 4 heavenly kings protecting the demonic lord. Kate shifts his gaze to Diana and thinks about which peak to sit on to escape. Diana insists that he ride with her on the giant wolf she just summoned. Fenrir says that the one Alia provided is too small. Alia protests against the injustice, but the enchantress remains steadfast in her decision. He climbed onto the back of the huge beast behind her. The sudden closeness made her shudder and let out a quiet, frightened scream. Her face flushed deep red while they prepared to set off. As soon as they start on their way, she looks back and asks if he is okay and if he is not injured. He quickly assures her that everything is fine, although he looks a bit depressed by the situation. She orders him to hold on tight and press his body against hers to maintain balance. He complies, but the intimacy of the request clearly unsettles him, and he begins to wonder if such close embraces are really necessary. He leans into the wind, and the large white wolf bursts forward. The speed and power of the spell exceed all expectations. The pack rushes loudly across the open plains, a solid mass of fur and muscles under the darkening sky. When night falls on the land, the group stops in the middle of the endless open field. Here you can see in every direction any pursuit will be spotted from afar, long before it approaches. Looking around at the situation, he notes, camping brings back a sense of nostalgia, so he suggests starting work by gathering firewood. But his companion has a different plan. She devalues the need for manual labor and states that servants handle that. With theatrical flair, she prepares to manifest a shelter. In an instant, the empty field transforms. A massive stone building bursts from the ground. The impressive scale of the spell stuns the witness as their eyes widen as a huge estate rises where there was only grass moments before. He freezes and stares at the intricate balconies and arched passages, realizing that what was promised as an ordinary tent is actually a full-fledged villa, while the refugees standing behind can only silently gape in awe at the incredible architecture. While the young girl beside him exclaims with delight at the sight of power, he suddenly feels humiliation. The abilities of the four heavenly kings prove too mighty. Sensing his shock, the recruit quickly offers modest apologies, regretting that in such a short time she could only provide this, the strongest dwelling. Turning to the young girl, he whispers a stern reminder to show proper respect and explains that despite her youthful appearance, the woman before them is much older than she seems. The girl bows her head, trying to reconcile the recruit's height with the weight of her years. He watched and froze in stunned silence when the young girl brushed off his concerns with a playful, confident smile. She assured him, for the four celestial kings, age is a trifle of no significance. Her confidence flowed through her sly glance. Seeing her confidence, little Luca cautiously joined the conversation and asked if he could address the summoner as Big Sister Diana. He encouraged the girl, saying that, being part of the Demon Lord family, she was free to call her whatever was comfortable, and it should help them feel like they belonged. That evening, amid the luxury of the banquet hall of the summoned villa, a new title began to settle on his shoulders like a heavy shadow. When his companions, excited, spoke of his sudden rise to power, he only modestly shrugged. Demon Lord still like a dream from which he had not yet fully awakened. Nearby, the refugees finally caught a moment of silence. Conversations shifted towards a brighter future. One man teased his friend Vagaton, hinting that with their new security, he might finally have a chance to find a girlfriend, a joke that drew a rare smile at the table. But as soon as he noticed Vagaton's tense facial expression and drops of sweat, his carefree mood broke. The man tried to joke and attribute everything to ordinary stomach pain, but the young lord with his sharp gaze immediately saw something much more alarming. Vagaton's vitality and endurance were rapidly falling, much lower than anyone else in this room. Holding everything inside and hiding the torment, the man realized his deception was failing. It was not just a cramp. A deep, understanding feeling gone he could no longer ignore, even when trying to appear normal. Sensing urgency, he stepped closer to the suffering man. His hand hovered like an instrument with cold precision. He indicated that the cause of the illness was just to the right of the solar plexus, which confused the man and sparked increasing anxiety. Without unnecessary words, he let the dark, swirling fog slip into his palm, reaching for the invisible ailment while the power pulsed and cracked. He was about to extract any dark influence that steals life from an innocent refugee. He extends his hand, fingers retracting, twisting, darkness like ink physically extracting corruption from the man's body. Vigon freezes and silently watches as the shadowy entity is squeezed from his chest. He holds a clump of evil forces in his palm. He observes the dark energy while the man gasps for air and tries to comprehend the incredible miracle he has just witnessed. The pain relief is instantaneous. The man clutches his stomach and looks around with a stunned smile, shouting that the agonizing pain has completely disappeared. The cat calmly asks how he feels, and the girl nearby is frozen, staring with wide-open eyes full of wonder. Lowering his gaze to his gloved hand, he explains dryly. He stole the very disease, treating the ailment as if it were physical loot that could be snatched. Then he reveals a deeper truth, ascending the throne as a demon king. He also took on the mantle of the Phantom Thief, a title that once lived only in the stories he told. As he speaks, a powerful surge of dark magic begins to whirl around him like a local storm. Using his specialized skills, he demonstrates the art of transformation, weaving magic so that it changes the very presence of those nearby. Observers are thrown into a frenzy of disbelief. They cannot comprehend how two legendary figures appear before them. Standing amid the trembling mirages of his power, he catches the stunned silence in the room and understands. His display of power and mastery has left the refugees completely overwhelmed. Suddenly, the tension bursts into a roar of admiration as the crowd realizes that a true legend stands before them. They greet him as the hero of their dreams and the true Phantom Thieves. He stands amid the thunderous applause of the refugees, their voices chanting his name in a rhythmic chorus of worship. Against the backdrop of celebration, a solemn escort approaches him to announce, "Dinner is already prepared." The table is about to explode with an incredible variety of dishes. From hot pizzas to perfectly sliced meat, a generosity the refugees could never have imagined. Sitting at the table, the young girl Lukum excitedly examines the taste of the meat, while also noting its rare preparation, and there is a slight surprise in her gaze. Beside her, Diana, holding herself nobly, explains that this is roast beef and it should be served exactly like that. Making her way through the crowd, Alira distributes huge portions of meat, playfully but with a slightly eerie tone, urging everyone to eat until their stomachs can take no more. She truly delights in the dark amusement of the physical limits of the human body, and because of this, those around can only stare in astonishment. Vagatin, already fully recovered and in a wonderful mood, laughs loudly, finishes his glass and shares his impression. What honey this is, and how strange it is that he doesn't feel the effects of alcohol at all. He continues to indulge his whims. Diana watches him closely, and her quiet, attentive gaze noticeably observes how he joyfully and carefreely delights. As the night stretches on, the celebration intensifies to a fever pitch. Empty bottles clutter the tables, and the refugees raise their glasses to their newfound hope and to the mysterious savior. Eventually, the celebration takes its toll, and the young enchantress is left collapsed, utterly exhausted. The cat lifts her into his arms, teases her for her unexpected fragility, and says that she truly needs care like a princess. He stands on the balcony of the luxurious estate. The night air is still and quiet after the celebrations. Having waited for him outside, Vagant spreads his arms and says that a very short sleep was enough for him to shake off the effects of the honey. Keith, worried about his friend's recovery, suggests that maybe he should rest a little longer. The older man brushes off the concern. He asks Keith not to speak of such lonely things until his face becomes serious. Then he delivers an unexpected message. Keith is no longer fit to remain a member of the Aldoberg Thieves Guild. The young leader freezes, eyes full of shock. Seeing the confusion on his face, Vagant does not rush to speak but immediately clarifies. He does not mean that they are no longer family, so Keith should not misunderstand. He extends his hand and firmly grabs Keith by the shoulder, emphasizing his point, and swears. They will remain family until the very end, regardless of the paths they take or who they become in this changing world. Vagant looks back at the hall where Diana and the others are resting, and without admitting it aloud, reveals his surprise. Now Keith leads an incredible team. He sees Keith has become much greater than before, a thief and demon lord bearing a burden of responsibility far beyond their humble beginnings. Because Keith has outgrown the narrow confines of the Aldoberg Thieves Guild, the experienced thief proposes a new way forward. Instead of mere participation, he tells them to create an official alliance between their two groups. He stares at Keith and makes it clear that he believes the young man is destined for a great future. Ahead lies fog and uncertainty, but Vagant assures, when the time comes, the guild will be there to support him in any grand endeavors. He weighs the burden of their shared history and understands. As a family, they have a special ability to act where others cannot. Vegeta watches, mixing pride with admiration, and recalls how far his friend has come. He notes, as a demon lord who now rules 4 heavenly kings and also a skilled phantom thief, there is nothing in this world he cannot claim for himself. When two groups prepare to part ways, they finally reflect on how their role has changed. They reach a shared understanding. They can no longer be the simple band of thieves they once were, but the unbreakable bond of family will always keep them together regardless of the path they choose. The heavy atmosphere quickly evaporates into a loud celebration. Guild members raise their glasses and thunder a toast to the phantom thief, the demon lord. Vagant opens his palm and pats his ally on the shoulder, urging him to shed his gloomy face and realize that creating this alliance is the best move for everyone involved. After the celebrations, he sets off riding a huge white she-wolf, leading Alira and Diana back to the temple of the demon lord, and reflects on the fatigue of the merchants from the guild who accompanied them. On the way, he begins to doubt what their new friends are really like. As Elias says, they turn aside and set out to explore the surrounding area. She gestures to show various inhabitants of these lands, and explains that in the human world they are called half-humans. This classification covers a wide range of non-human intellect selves, dwarves, goblins, and kobolds. These races have built a lively community in the lands around the Demon King's castle, living in harmony alongside residential areas designated for the Demon King's own subordinates. He listened as his companion suggested. The shortest path leads to the village of Elvasand. This idea immediately caught his interest. They set off across rugged, rocky terrain. The horses carried them past a peaceful lake hidden among dense forests. He adjusted his glasses. His gaze froze ahead as the rhythmic dull thud hit pauses in the soft earth as they reached the outskirts of the settlement. The young ruler finally looked at the inhabitants, gazing at the slender, pointed-eared figures and feeling a quiet, awe-filled admiration. The journey leads Kit, Diana, and Alira to the hidden village of Elvis, a quiet settlement hidden among ancient trees and divided by a gentle stream. Kit stands by the entrance and surveys the peaceful wooden huts and atmosphere, as if untouched by the chaos of the world. He takes a step further into the village and observes the simple, peasant life of the people gathered under temporary shelters. The air is silent, but the strangers have already been noticed and the tension is rising. As they continue to approach, the elf woman lifts her gaze from her tasks. Her face suddenly pales, a sharp, unmistakable realization flares within her. Far away, the three still do not suspect the shock their appearance sows among the villagers. She quickly presses the child to herself. Movements are jerky, panicked, and retreating hastily, she knocks over a woven basket. The peaceful silence of the village is broken by rustling footsteps, and the fear of the inhabitants becomes palpable. They flee from the newcomers. He is confused by the sharp, hostile reaction. He watches in dismay as the peasants scatter hurriedly. He hasn't even managed to say a word of greeting when heavy wooden doors slam shut with a bang right in front of him, echoing a clear message. He is not welcome here. Only then did he finally understand the depth of their horror when he saw a young elf curled up in a ball, trembling with fear nearby. The whisper about the Demon King rolled through the air in waves, and he realized, even here, in this remote wilderness, his reputation as the Demon Lord inspired only desperate dread. He stands in the middle of the silent village, his gaze sliding over the inhabitants who remain bound to the place. A terrible realization overwhelms him. They do not flee because they do not believe escape is possible but for his power. When he looks closely at their trembling figures, he asks himself whether this paralyzing fear is the weight of his title. But before he can ponder this, the elder steps forward. His voice thunders at the gathered crowd, and he announces that the Demon Lord has come to find peace within their borders. This announcement brings unexpected relief to the younger elves. Their faces brighten when the elder declares that no sacrifices will be needed tonight. He looks at them, his brows furrow as he contemplates the weight of that word. The fact that he appeared in person seemed to shift the grim schedule everyone was prepared for, but the reason remains unclear. A whisper passes through the crowd like a wave about the time of these offerings. Some note that the next ritual should not have come for at least 6 months. The misunderstanding only grows when he tries to reconcile his presence with their talks about sacrifices. Seeking clarity, he learns about a dark tradition. Elves regularly sacrifice themselves to strengthen the ranks of monsters. He says he just came for the night to check how things are. But as soon as the villagers realize he did not come for anyone's life, their horror breaks and turns into wild, joyful energy. They are finally safe. Later he finds himself at a luxurious table with a pile of food, Diana and Alira nearby. The transition from a terrifying conqueror to a respected guest is jarring, but he begins to eat. A simple act, just sharing the meal, softens the atmosphere. While they eat, the villagers cautiously approach. Their fear changes to gentle, modest hospitality. They invite him to sit at the table with them, and at the unexpected change in their behavior, he freezes for a moment, unable to hide his surprise. He stood by the window, and his thoughts bore the weight of the village's troubles. Monsters were being bred, sacrificing elves, not for him systemic cruelty that demanded a fundamental shift in the world's power structure. If only there were a way to maintain the monster population without such a barbaric cost. His reflections were suddenly interrupted by a quiet, girlish voice from the door. Embarrassed, he lifted his eyes from the bed and saw a young elf woman who had stepped inside. Her appearance was unexpected, so delicate and slender. She introduced herself as Fiori, and her voice trembled, slightly mixed with reverence and duty. With a deep bow, she said it was a distinct honor for her to serve the one she considered the Lord of Demons until the very night. When she leaned closer, looking intently and eagerly, a wave of panic overwhelmed him. He could not help but wonder if this intimate closeness was another aspect of his sacrifice, while the villagers felt they must inevitably exalt their dark lord. He quickly tried to calm her and convince her that such service was unnecessary, but his refusal seemed to wound her. Bitterness gathered in her eyes as she asked if she was somehow inadequate or if her presence simply did not matter to him. Seeing her despair, he gently clarified. In fact, it was already enough that someone would have someone to confide in. Then he posed a hypothetical question: what would happen to the village if the Lord of Demons suddenly disappeared? Her face darkened as she explained, without his supposed protection, the village would become prey to ruthless slave traders. The grim truth of her words unfolded in a vision of chaos. Armed men descending on a peaceful settlement and dragging frightened elves in chains. Without powerful restraint, the entire community would be methodically dismantled and sold into slavery. She learned that these predators usually attacked every 6 months. The persistent nightmare was sustained only by fear of the Lord of Demons' wrath, and it was bitter irony. The very figure the world hated was the only thing standing between these people and total destruction. He watches as a column of wagons flows through the night, the time for a repeated beam pattern approaches. When they talk about the future, Diana suggests moving away from a rule based on fear and transitioning to a more stable power structure, saying that to truly govern, a different approach is needed. Elira offers the elves protection, literally sells them breath. While he contemplates the need for control and strategy, concluding that disciplined soldiers who follow orders are more valuable than mindless monsters born of sacrifice. Seizing the chance, Diana suggests using the approaching slave raid to their advantage. He agrees. Saving the elves from traitors will earn them immortal gratitude, and he orders Eliri to use her magical eyes to scan the surrounding area. In response, she calls the winged cyclopean eye that rises into the sky. It soars above the landscape under its watchful gaze. The magic scout quickly finds the threat. A large group of 50 armed men with carts stands just 10 paratowers away. Having reported, she estimates that the merchants' heavy load and the difficult terrain will delay their arrival at the village by another 5 days. He is already thinking of entrusting Jinru to resolve the threat, but Diana cuts him off, makes a more political move. Instead, she suggests visiting the Elven Church to secure the people's loyalty even more reliably. While the battle rages, the young lord observes the undeniable might of Jinru, yet he is still troubled by the strange, eyeless creature that his ally destroys with a single earthquake strike. He remains steadfast in his conviction, knowing that the forces of Jinru alone are enough to overcome any obstacle they may face. 5 days of traveling through the wilderness and the group finally reaches the outskirts of the elven village. Their arrival is very close now. Elsewhere, a man named the Loma slave trader with an insatiable passion for profit relaxes while waiting for the hunt to start, impatiently eager to see the elves up close. The trader casually chats with the mercenaries, saying that the current season is gold for them while they prepare for the strike. The silence in the forest suddenly breaks when the merchants are noticed, but their own advance halts the spectacle they cannot comprehend. Meanwhile, the elven guards are already sounding the alarm and preparing for the inevitable clash. Jinru calmly sits amid the chaos. His very appearance forces one to watch, as he prepares to face the looming threat. Seeing his gigantic figure, the mercenaries froze for a moment. It seemed to them that before them was not a man but a monster. Their leader, Phelim, snorted disdainfully at their cowardice. He considered comparing him to some beast, an insult to his own ambitions. Then he stood up to his full height, and his voice thundered across the clearing as he solemnly declared, "Jinru is one of the 4 heavenly kings." He immediately made it clear why he had come. By the order of the Demon Lord, he was here to protect the elves and would tolerate no further interference. This sensation left the criminal confused. Rumors had long circulated that the hero had already defeated the Demon Lord. He doubted the truth of the warrior's words, unable to reconcile the news with what he believed to be true. Rejecting the warrior's accusations as mere bluff, the traitor barked an order to his men strike him. He was confident no fallen servant of the king could withstand his numbers. In response, the mercenaries surged forward. Their commander shouted for the archers to prepare a volley. They acted with coordinated skill, aiming at the giant who stood before them stubbornly and openly. With a whistle in the air, a hail of sharpened wood and iron scattered as soon as the order to fire was given. A deadly rain to end the clash instantly. Although the giant was covered with spears, he still stood upright. But Phelim laughed, certain that the sheer number of wounds would surely knock him down and prevent him from moving. He gloated over what he considered an easy victory. He and his men watched in horror as the seemingly dead warrior began to move. The spears embedded in his body did not stop him. Instead, his hands swelled, mutated, and became something monstrous, defying nature itself. The warrior declares, "The right to kill belongs only to those who are ready to be killed." With a short, brutal movement, he lunges into attack, cutting off the traitor's hand, and commands that this intent be engraved in the soul. Panic flares among the ranks. The traitors scramble to retreat. Their boastful grimaces vanish, only fear remains as they realize what monstrosity they have unleashed. He watches them flee and brushes them off, calling them a pathetic bunch of cowards. Amid the carnage, Alira approaches, and on her face is not fear but slight irritation. She says she is bored and challenges the blood-soaked warrior to a duel. Let him at least entertain her. Not long ago, the chief trader boasted about his investments, confident that the hired top-class adventurers from the Kingdom of Tristram's guild would handle any problems. But that confidence vanished without a trace. Now he froze, staring upward at the giant, blood-soaked figure of the man he had tried to kill, his heart pounding wildly in his chest in a ragged rhythm of fear. The warrior loomed over the fallen man, his voice cold and demanding. He confirmed that the man was a slave trader, then gave a chilling command, "Open your mouth." Ignoring the man's whimpering, he clenched the traitor's face and forcibly poured a dark, viscous liquid down his throat. The traitor gasped for air and struggled free, but the warrior's hand was iron, promising mercilessness for the third time. He loomed over the trembling traitor, declaring that the forced consumption of his flesh was a binding contract. He ordered the man to convey his will to his associates. Now elves were strictly forbidden to approach. Finally, issuing a grim warning, he promised, any violation of this agreement would result in a terrible punishment, and the merchant froze, caught in stammering fear. While he stood still, the freed elves began to stir, moving across the clearing, mixing relief with the anxiety that had not yet left. Watching him closely from a very short distance, the dark sorceress marveled at the same wildly colossal power radiating from the swordsman. She pondered the incredible luck of having such formidable might under her command. But he coldly reminded the survivors that they owed their lives to him. Far away, he listened to the whisper of that rising power, his thoughts incessantly drawn to the legacy of the demon lord. Beside him, his companion said not a word, only kept her gaze fixed on fate, which seemed to draw them ever closer to the very heart of the storm. High above the surrounding lands, the spires of Tristram Castle rose like a silent beacon, unaware of the evil news approaching its gates. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the royal chambers burst open with a crash, and a frightened guard rushed in, his voice breaking with haste as he shouted to the ruler. There, he handed over a proclamation that froze the air. The seer recognized the unmistakable signs of the demon lord's resurrection. The statement sent a wave of shock through the assembled officials. Their eyes darted to the ruler in hopeless attempts to find a clue. Hearing this, he merely glanced over his golden goblet. The expression on his face was more mild annoyance than true panic as he noted how terrifying the news sounded. He sits in a luxurious hall and listens, as his messenger desperately suggests immediately sending the heroes back to the Demon Lord's castle, citing the unprecedented speed of the Dark Lord's return. The carefreeness shared even by the general leaves the messenger deeply embarrassed. They mock the threat in a joking tone, and the loyal servant begins to wonder if these are even the same men he once served. He cautiously asks if the hero's strength truly surpasses the Demon Lord's power, trying to find some reassurance, because such a marvel from his superiors is hard to comprehend. His consciousness sharply returns to the hero's previous victory, and this strengthens his confidence. Since the Demon Lord was already defeated, the hero is definitely stronger than both. Meanwhile, he retreats with a heavy heart, and the king generally blunders about their bravado, their laughter echoing through the chamber as if this is not the case at all. Meanwhile, he remains alone with his worries. The scene shifts to the hero's party in a noisy town, where Jelmy calls them to connect immediately despite a brief moment of rest. While he gathers the others together, Mari stands silently, her gaze detached, as if increasingly burdened by the uncertainty of their path. Elven villagers silently freeze in shocked silence as the group approaches their secluded home, not knowing what to expect from these strangers. Soon they are overwhelmed by a wave of emotions as Fiori embraces her relatives, tears of relief tremble on her face, while Keith and his companions watch from afar with respectful distance. This joyful reunion spreads through the village. Families tightly embrace among towering trees, all under the watchful, silent gaze of the Demon King. He stays away from the celebration. His figure sharply contrasts with the peaceful surroundings as he contemplates the next move. Then his gaze stops on the pitiful figure of Thelum. He lies prostrate on the ground, anguished over the loss of his estate. Keith's cold voice demands an answer. Does he really consider his comrades merely property to be traded? The slave trader begs for his life, but they grab him by the collar and drag him upwards. And Alira asks if it wouldn't be better to simply execute him on the spot to end his vile existence. Instead of deciding himself, he redirects the question to the elves and asks what they want to do with the man who brought them such suffering and stole their freedom. They respond with quiet dignity, saying they do not wish for more bloody conflict in their forest, choosing peace and the restoration of their lives instead of a cycle of engines. With an exhausted expression, he watches as Diana joyfully offers a more permanent solution for the slave trader as soon as he is outside the protection of the forest. The young demonic king remains silent. He knows that any reaction will only fuel her bloodthirstiness. Turning again to the prisoner kneeling, he orders someone to look up and asks if Jinru has a potion capable of preserving the human body. When the swordsman confirms such a thing exists, he is enveloped by a cold, eerie satisfaction. His gaze sharpens, his eyes narrow with terrible force as he utters the last cold warning. He makes it clear. If his mercy wavers even slightly, the consequences will be dreadful, and forbids this man from ever touching another elf. Having settled the prisoner's matter, he gives Jinru rare approval for his service. The veteran warrior bows his head, deeply moved by the recognition from his lord. As he begins to leave, his companions watch the interaction from afar. Diana notes with a hint of envy how genuinely pleased Jinru is. He finally understands the heavy weight carried by a simple word of praise from a demon lord. Then the elven villagers approach closer. Their voices thick with emotion as they express boundless gratitude. They swear that the threat of slave traders has vanished forever. Relief is felt immediately after exhausting captivity or that agreement. He adjusts his focus, and a cold calculation appears on his face as he reminds the elf that such gratitude must be repaid. This is the moment when his natural talent for management and strategy comes to the forefront. He looks at the gathered crowd, acknowledges the loyalty they have proven repeatedly through regular sacrifices, and between the savior and the saved, the dynamic begins to shift toward an increasingly formal power structure. He stands before the assembled elves, and in a steady voice rejects the very idea of traditional retribution, declaring that old sacrifices are no longer needed in his new order. Pointing at the bow with arrows lying on the ground, he put forward a new demand: to provide him with soldiers instead of tribute so that their skills would serve the common cause. Holding faithful commanders nearby, he explains his plan to use the legendary skill of elven archers. He promises them full protection in a place among his warriors in exchange for service under his banner. Putting a monocle on his eye, he looks them straight in the face and clarifies: he is not looking for mindless slaves. He needs warriors with their own will, emphasizing that they are much more than just tools to be used. These words hit the very heart of the young elf. Her tears of fear and uncertainty disappear, and her gaze becomes filled with deep awareness and new hope. As the weight of this new agreement settles on the village, the group stands together in a clearing. The struggle for power begins to shift from exploitation to mutual purpose and respect. He silently and intently watches them, reflecting on the long years of suffering they endured and the inevitable necessity of this step for the future of both their peoples. In the final joint act of devotion, the elves fall to their knees and bow low, swearing a solemn oath to always serve under the command of the demon lord, no matter what the future brings. He adjusted his glasses and declared that the next target is those who live in the homes of the dwarves, to the surprise of his companions who were still digesting the recent agreement. While she rushed with furious energy toward the new target, Jinru hurried to catch up, forcing the leader to focus on the long list of races: orcs, goblins, and kobolds, who would soon be brought under his banner. Almost a whole month passed in a whirlwind of affairs. The landscape changed as the gigantic construction project gained momentum near the cliffs themselves. Detailed blueprints were spread out on a wooden table, emphasizing the absolute necessity of a stone tower to withstand possible magical attacks from the surrounding territories. Experienced builders gathered, among them a master dwarf whose fame rests on impeccable craftsmanship, and they debated materials. They agreed that wood would be suitable for housing, but for the harsh conditions of the beds and the main structure, stone was needed. The young leader raised his gaze as soon as his name was called. His face focused on the titanic task of turning these wild lands into an impregnable fortress. Standing on the edge of the abyss with Jelm, Kate pointed towards a specific gap in the terrain, recalling how that blind spot was once used by invaders during his days with the hero and his squad. Because of this tactical vulnerability, he explained, the fortress must be built right on the rocks, earning a muffled approving grunt from the master mason, who immediately recognized the sharp strategic mind of the former thief. He directed how the cliff was transformed into a bustling construction site, the air ringing with the rhythmic clatter of hammers and loud work songs. The lyrics flew over the scaffolding, a defiant anthem about the Aldoberg thieves who guard the dark roads and seek treasures. In the midst of the labor song, the seasoned gnome stops work, his ears twitching at a sound that should not be there. While his comrades continue laying stone and singing about the newly found self, the Phantom Thief team, he senses a change in the atmosphere. From the height, he surveys the surroundings, and what he sees makes his breath heavier. His pupils twitch as he notices 4 figures crossing the distant terrain. He mutters quietly in astonishment, noticing the strange unrest among the local monsters, and in shock realizes, among those approaching, there is a human. Alarm rises immediately. The scout shouts down to the leaders that strangely dressed people are making a direct path to the fortress. The news ripples through the entire camp and reaches the ears of those bearing the heavy work of the day. In the deep stone corridors of the towering castle, chaos overwhelms Diana and Victor. They are torn from silence by the sudden urgency of workers' shouts. A messenger rushes past them like an arrow, desperately calling for their leader, but Diana knows for sure. The demon lord is currently away along with Jinru and Elira. Victor's expression hardens as he confirms the message. People are approaching their refuge. Diana pales, realizing the full danger. The timing could not be worse. Their strongest violators are nowhere to be found. Her gaze sharpens, a new firmness appearing in her resolve, and the full weight of what is happening heavily falls on her shoulders. She declares, if their lord is absent, then it falls to her and the victor to intercept the newcomers and protect what they have built. Pressing his hat down, he did so with grim finality. Victor prepares for the clash while they hold positions in the dim corridor. They are the last line of defense, waiting for the unknown guests to arrive and reach the heart of their new home. He stood firm, his fingers slid over the cold steel of the revolver as he gave a stern command. He ordered Diana to gather everyone in the fort and retreat to the safety of the Demon Lord's castle. She doubted whether he should face the approaching heroes alone and reminded him of his past defeat, but his gaze did not waver. His decision was unequivocal. The time had come to become the shield for the Demon Lord King. Suddenly, the air exploded with violence. A winged creature was torn to pieces by a concentrated energy blast. In the whirl of a chaotic monster onslaught, the people in the group had to struggle with all their might to keep their balance. Zot, his face glistening with sweat, burst out with a sharp complaint about the terrible number of enemies. In the heat of the clash, a bitter truth surfaced. They remembered how easy it was when they simply listened to the one they themselves had rejected. When their path was cut off by a merciless horde, Yelm pointed to a narrow side passage. He suggested a detour, hoping to find a route with fewer monsters, even if it meant having to struggle longer through treacherous terrain. As they moved, a heavy silence fell on one of them, as if a dark memory began to surface. The memory was cold about the moment when they returned to their former comrade and turned him on. They convinced themselves that he was nothing more than a burden, dead weight to be discarded, and the relief that came after his death still clings like a stain. When Zot boasted again about the riches the king promised them for killing the demon, Lord once again, as before, did not get close to him. Meralda remained distant. Her face was a mask of cold determination, and she declared that she cared only about completing the mission regardless of the cost and regardless of whom she went with. She made her way through torn ravines. The stick in her hand held firmly as she scanned the horizon. Behind, the others followed, their unity cracking under the weight of the ghosts of past deeds and the ever-growing pressure of the task ahead. Suddenly, a massive spherical explosion covers her and her companions. It tears the ravine. As the dust begins to settle, the group tenses and their faces show the realization. They are no longer hunters but prey. Emerging from the haze, the shooter unleashes an unrelenting hail of bullets. Dual revolvers flash with unimaginable speed. This is Victor, one of the four heavenly kings, and his first volley immediately shows. He wants to stop their journey right here. Under the weight of this devastating volley, Mari lets out an apology. Her magical shield cracks and begins to crumble. The impact force pushes fragments in all directions, and the squad has to scatter to survive this rampage. Seeing the despair of their situation, Zot growls through his teeth at the insane speed with which the force shoots them point blank, and Jelmbart an order for the mage to strike the surroundings with magic. They need a distracting moment, and they need it right now if they want to close the distance. A muffled flashbang burst into the sky, momentarily flooding the battlefield with white light and smoke, while the mage unleashes her elemental fury. Through the haze, the fighters shuffle positions. Shots disappear for a moment, giving way to the crackle of magic and the heavy breathing of despair. Seizing a moment of confusion, the leader bursts forward sharply, recalling a piece of intelligence about the shooter's supposed weak spot in close combat. He knows that if he just reaches the blade, the advantage of the revolvers will disappear. He closes the distance in an instant. The sword describes a wide arc as he taunts the shooter, implying he has degenerated and weakened. Victor barely manages to raise his weapons at such close range, his eyes widening as the cold steel approaches his throat. The blade finds its target, piercing deep and bloody into the gunslinger's chest. A fountain of crimson blood bursts into the air. With the last cold order to die, the warrior stands over the fallen enemy, and it seems the battle has turned with a single brutal strike. He delivers a devastating blow. A flash of light tears the air apart, the force of the shock bites into the ground, and debris scatters in all directions as the battlefield shakes. The entire space rises in dust, and the young enchantress Diana watches from above on her huge white wolf. Her face is pure shock as the scale of destruction becomes clear, while others nearby freeze in disbelief, a breath caught in their chests from the sudden and bloody turn of events. When the smoke begins to clear, a familiar and formidable figure steps onto the battlefield. His mere presence immediately draws attention. He glances at the young leader and utters his name as if a long and tangled history stretches between them, while the fallen rifleman lies motionless behind. He catches the gaze of his former comrade, a barely noticeable, understanding smile on his lips as he throws out a phrase about how much time has passed since their last meeting. Opposite him, the fighter stands tensely, sweat pouring down his forehead as he realizes the true weight of what is happening and whose person the man standing before him is. With the clang of steel flies a strike as Kate Oldoberg suddenly Interveneshi's blade cuts into Helm, and sparks fly like a fountain. Helm recoils, not believing his eyes, and his voice trembles as he asks how the man he thought dead can stand before him. Because of this sudden intervention, a powerful shockwave rolls through the air, forcing everyone nearby to shield their eyes. Diana watches the spectacle, her gaze a mix of awe and fear. The words "Demon Lord" escape her lips in a whispered, trembling breath. She tightly clutches the dress, the fabric bunching under trembling fingers, and the reality of the event finally overwhelms her awareness. Her shock is interrupted by Victor. His eyes widen sharply as soon as he hears his name called through the chaos on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Alira, supported by comrades, rises to her feet, her face darkening with bruised, offended pride. She mutters about the aching irony. She is saved by the very creature they were supposed to oppose. When the gunpowder settles, Jelm finds his voice again. His shock turns into a poisonous mocking screech. He tears into Kit, calls him a rat, and demands to know if he was again planning to run away and turn back, like last time they met. When Kit turns away and addresses Victor directly, he is met with a calm, steady gaze. The Demon King advises the archer. Engaging in battle with an enemy who perfectly knows his vulnerable spots is a mistake. He responds with a short approving nod, tells Victor that he held up well, and that from now on he will take everything upon himself. Against the backdrop of the rest of the party, Jelm, Marie, and Zad, they freeze in paralysis. A wild thought spins in their heads as they finally grasp the true identity of the man they only knew as Ki. He stands before Marie, his face a frozen mask of cruel determination as he quietly utters an apology. It pains him to turn against those he once called comrades, but he insists. His path is already set. Marie, eyes full of tears, can only burst out with bitter curses, calling him a pathetic survivor of the world whom he now betrays. Because of her defiance, Alira Aquariata explodes with vengeful fury. She raises her staff, and twisted flames and dark energy close around her. She shouts a deadly threat, promising to leave behind only a charred body. He does not move an inch, even as a fierce gust of magical wind breaks loose. Streams of force tears roll across the battlefield, launching her desperate attack. Amid increasing chaos, Diana's gaze sharpens. Her eyes widen, carrying the weight of the unfolding catastrophe. She tenses and withstands the blow to survive the shockwaves of battle, and her delicate body freezes, ready to sneak through the surrounding ruins. The situation reached a breaking point. Huge vines crawled and began devouring the castle's stone towers. The ancient fortress groaned hoarsely under the pressure of this insignificant growth. The walls cracked as the siege intensified. Seeing the danger, she took everything into her own hands and in panic ordered the rest of the guards and townsfolk to hide within the crumbling walls. Her face filled with determination. She declared she would handle the threat herself only if she could urgently find and report to her master. As she hurried through the shadows, suddenly a blinding pillar of dark energy rose before her, and it sharply stopped her in place. Her breath caught in her throat. The power of this phenomenon pressed her to shield her eyes, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. Emerging from the light, the figure she sought stood frozen. He stood and waited, and the feeling of familiarity mixed with obvious change. She sharply inhaled, not averting her gaze from his calm face and the gleam of his monocle. A thin, understanding smile, and he simply announced his return as if the world had not just been turned upside down. Overwhelmed with relief and the incredibility that this had even happened, she rushed forward, buried her face in his chest, and clung tightly. He stood straight, a silent support, and finally reunited with his most loyal follower amid the ruins of their former life. Hitch froze, eyes wide behind his glasses. Nearby, Diana held the same astonishment. Her face pales as soon as she senses the change in the air. Meanwhile, the strategist watches the tension rise and remains silent with grim firmness. She confirms the terrible news. Her voice trembles as she says that the heroes have already set out, marching straight to the Demon Lord's castle. This revelation sweeps through the group like a shockwave. Jinru and Elira can only stare blankly in confusion when they learn that Victor stayed behind and is trying to hold off the vanguard alone. Realizing the sacrifice of his comrade, Kate sharply narrows his gaze. His eyes constrict, and a cold, calculating focus settles over everything around. He turns away from the group, his thoughts racing as he realizes the Demon Lord's return was doomed by prophecy, exactly what he had long awaited. Closing his eyes for just a moment, he seems to weigh the weight of the whole world and his own past against the unfolding crisis. The young man stands unyielding, his cloak billowing in the wind, while the others discuss the terrifying possibility that the Demon Lord and the four heavenly kings will unite their power. He finally speaks, his voice steady and unwavering, as he declares that he will face the threat alone, driven by an old personal vendetta against those who call themselves heroes. He stands firm while his loyal subjects protest his reckless decision. Jinru insists that protecting their lord is a sacred duty, especially in such dire circumstances, and Elira's voice trembles with worry as she tries to convince him. Let them handle the threat themselves. Their faces are filled with despair and unwavering devotion. Tears gather in their eyes as they try to come to terms with the burden of his command. Turning his back on them, the young king places a steadying hand on Diana's shoulder and issues the final, absolute order. They are to stay behind and simply watch. For this is not a request, it is a command. With a heavy heart and tears streaming down her face, she finally submits to his will, quietly whispering her consent as the weight of his resolve envelops the entire group. A moment later, he stands amid a swirling vortex of magical fire completely unshaken, which utterly astonishes his opponent. The latter screams in confusion, unable to understand why the flames have no effect. A confident smile slides across his lips as he reveals the secret of his invulnerability, a skill known as immovable. His enemy finds no answer and is overcome only by growing horror. Kate deftly dodges Zoth's heavy blows. The warrior explains the essence of his defensive skill. It nullifies received damage at the cost of complete immobility, so it works especially well against ranged fighters. Yet despite this, the Phantom Thief remains an extremely elusive enemy. Suddenly he activates a new technique, skill theft. Zoth widens his eyes in shock, feeling his power being stolen and taken away. Kate calmly acknowledges the warrior's mastery with his weapon, while Merelda and Mari watch the unfolding disaster, unable to believe their own eyes. This evolution of his abilities is a true revelation. What was once dismissed as a mere transmutation trick has turned into a deadly tool. In the heat of battle, he can tear out the very essence of his opponent along with their equipment. He remains unmoved as Zoda's rage grows, even when the warrior snarls that an ordinary thief cannot match his raw power. On Kit's face is a cold, calculated confidence. The warrior lunges forward and puts all the rest of his resolute spirit into a single explosive strike aimed straight at the thief's head. He catches a massive punch with one hand, a dull crack flies across the clearing and echoes. Zoda's face twists in pain and absolute horror. He realizes that his attack is completely neutralized. He watches as Zoda's defiance turns into agony. His muscles visibly fill with weakness, strength literally draining from him. The first opponent is already incapacitated. Kate shifts her cold gaze to the next target, leaving the fallen warrior lying on the ground. He rushes forward with dazzling speed against Merelda, knocking her down before she can even start the spell. Standing over the fallen enemies, he feels a colossal difference in strength compared to their previous encounter at the end. He stands over the fallen Magehai's face, cold and detached, as he prepares to finish what he started. When he stretches out his hand, screams of horror scatter across the forest glade like thunder. Her voice breaks as she calls for Joan with her last strength, and the magic is forcibly pulled away. Leaves her broken, she sobs on the ground. He turns away from her apologies. She whines, begs for forgiveness, but he hears none of her words as he goes to his final goal. Then he turns to the last party member still standing, calmly explaining that he deprived Zoth of his power, and the Myrtles of all their magical might, leaving only Jelm to face him. The young leader trembles, fear and rage mingle within him. His face is sweaty as he looks at the monster that was once his partner. In response to such a demonstrative challenge from the feudal lords, a dark, mocking smile spreads across the villain's face. The intruder looks with cold clarity as Jelm roars in a hopeless declaration of his hero status, and ironically admits that his opponent has become exactly what he hates. He does not lose rhythm as the hero sobs from a phlegm attack. Meeting the blow with his swift theft, everything blurs into a smeared motion. Holding a torn, dark crystal above his head, his face reveals nothing. Jelm recoils in shocked denial, his voice trembling as he demands an explanation of what just happened and why such a valuable artifact was not sold long ago. Thanks to his unique abilities, he reveals, Swift Steel allowed him to snatch that very stone from the previous demon lord. He coldly explains, without trembling, that this gem is the true source of that ancient, terrible power. A moment later, he activates the artifact, and a fierce pillar of dark energy bursts forth from that spot, tearing the sky and shaking the ground beneath their feet. When the blinding glow fades, the full scale of the destruction becomes clear. In fear, Jelm barely whispers that he finally sees the true, Willess might of the Demon King. At this devastating display, Jelm finally finds a spark of desperate fury. He lunges forward with a scream, branding his opponent a monster. The warrior's head-on attack meets a sudden, explosive counter. He is thrown back by a wave of pure magical pressure. As the dust begins to settle, he stands amid the battlefield ruins, staring at the mangled body of the hero who dared to challenge him. He looks down at the fallen enemy, who can only give a last hoarse breath to acknowledge the rank of the man standing over him before losing consciousness. He stood among the torn rocks, staring at the spectacle with grim satisfaction. The long-awaited moment had finally come. The hero was defeated. His loyal subordinates gathered before him proof that power had changed. Seeing her victory, Diana's eyes filled with tears of devotion. She spoke in a trembling voice her admiration for him, the true Devil Lord flared to a feverish peak. Beside her, Jinru and Victor bowed their heads in solemn respect. They voiced a shared feeling, declaring that the honor of serving under his banner was immeasurable. While the group surveyed the fallen, Alia sharply turned to him and asked if they should finish off those still alive. But Strategist X adjusted his glasses and calmly refused, stating there was no need. Mari watched silently and an ever-growing, silent horror appeared on her face. Everyone looked at the battlefield, where a single sword stuck in the ground killed like a tombstone. Everyone agreed, the end was obvious. The hero's nightly company was broken beyond return, their legend vanished into dust as they were declared no longer a threat. Above the battlefield, clouds lazily drift overhead while a cold proposal echoes. One voice asks if it is time to deliver the final blow to their defeated enemies, but the Demon Lord rejects the idea, considering it unnecessary. Beneath them, once mighty heroes lie broken in the mud. Zot, Meralda, and Jelm were stripped of everything that made them legends. Their enhanced power, spiritual awareness, and leadership qualities were systematically erased. He adjusts his glasses with a self-satisfied smile, enjoying the pure theft of their power. Coldly and precisely he explains, now they are no more than ordinary commoners of level 1. Their very essence has been removed to serve his own purposes. Turning his back to the fallen, he declares, without their status, the heroic company has truly ceased to exist. As the dark figure begins to leave, Mari remains on her knees, her voice trembling, and she calls out to Kite, relentlessly trying to reach the man she once knew. When he hears his own name, he freezes, his eyes widen, and for a moment something flashes across his face, perhaps regret or recognition. He looks over his shoulder at the girl reaching out to him, but his face remains unreadable under the weight of the new mantle. His companion strategist reminds him of their bond as comrades, while nearby Jelmi falls into the dust, cursing the loss of every attempt he ever made. He falls to his knees, his face twisted with despair and remorse. Tears roll down his cheeks as he utters an empty apology for his actions and begs to restore the power just taken from him. As the weight of his confession hangs in the air, Marie silently freezes in shock and watches. He admits, his previous attempt to kill Keith was carried out under royal decree, claiming he had no other choice. And then he will plead for mercy and restoration of lost powers. Watching this pitiful spectacle, the man in glasses shifts his gaze to Keith and asks what intentions he has regarding the stolen energy. He aloud wonders if Keith plans to use this new power to challenge the Demon Lord once again. The despair of the fallen leader turns into outright fierce rage mixed with curses as he realizes the reality of his situation. As he curses his fate, Keith remains cold, his gaze fixed on the horizon, and Marie has to quietly whisper his name, her voice thick with longing. Without looking back, the young man with horns gives a final, cold piece of advice, telling his former comrades to live happily. He admits he never wanted them to see this side of him, and ignoring Mary's desperate cries, begins to walk away. She can only watch, eyes wide with shock and a broken heart, as the person she once knew becomes a stranger to her. His silhouette fades into the distance, and the silence between them is now a chasm that cannot be crossed. Returning to his new allies, he encounters the dark mage and clings to his hand with playful tenderness. She suggests going home to eat, and her lighthearted tone sharply contrasts with the ruin left behind. His gaze sweeps over the harsh mountain peaks and he agrees, it's time to move. The route is already set. They return to Demon Castle, leaving the broken heroes to their new, powerless lives. Standing beside his new companions, he declares that their revenge has finally come to an end, and their shared goal is accomplished. He believes they can now step away from the battles that haunted them. His gaze fixes on the horizon and his thoughts drift to Marie, hoping that now, with the shadow of their past dispelled, she will find the happiness she deserves. But despite their own struggle, the world continues to sink into chaos. A brutal war breaks out between the Imperial Army and the 7 allied forces. The battle rages across the continental land, divided between the vast domains of the Demon Lord and the Kingdom of Tristan. In the heat of the furious battle, a sudden devastating force tears the ranks apart. The earth cracks as a dark power descends upon the field of slaughter. Amid the carnage, the group asserts itself, standing firm, while the swordsmen strive by command to capture the attention of the fighting soldiers. Raise loud shouts so they listen. The demonic lord has come for their very power. Roaring, he challenges the fighters and demands, let those who are ready to sacrifice themselves step forward. He doesn't care under what banner they fight. Only their determination to give their strength matters. Soldiers caught between their own lives and deadly combat can only freeze and stare into shocked silence. A wave of confusion ripples through the ranks as they try to comprehend this unexpected invasion. Despite the severity of the situation, some remain stubborn, questioning who these aliens are. Their gaze is fixed only on the war ongoing nearby. They reject the threat of the demon lord, stubbornly chasing victory. The Imperial commander snorts disdainfully at the interruption and declares that he will crush anyone who dares to stand in his way. Behind him, archers draw their bows with mechanical precision ready to resume the slaughter despite the newcomer's warning. In a rare moment of shared bloodthirstiness, both the Imperial and Allied commanders roar to their troops. Attack! They completely ignore the ultimatum they have just received. The battlefield erupts with a new frenzy of violence, and the two sides latch onto each other with even greater fury. The scale of the strategy. His face is tired submission as he looks down at the unfolding chaos. He has already calculated that this would happen. The stubbornness of people in the heat of battle is a predictable, though tragic, constant. Next to him, the young demon king coldly and thoughtfully watches the senseless slaughterer's two armies, having squeezed past his squad together, once again throw themselves at each other and resume mutual annihilation. Since they decided to disregard his mercy, he is preparing to show the true weight of his power. He returns to his companion and gives the signal to move at their intervention. The swordsman immediately responds with a sharp nod, and his hand already reaches for the blade as they prepare to forcibly take control of the battlefield. A sharp, fierce surge of power and he activates his unique talent of the Phantom Thief, Swift Thief. A wave of impact sweeps through the ranks of those charging into attack. Soldiers are forcibly torn from their positions, their skills and attributes knocked out, and they fly away like ragdolls. While the soldiers stagger from the sudden loss of their strength, the demon hunter plunges into the thick of it, his pistols roar, and he, weaving chaos, slips between the blows. From his vantage point, the young demonic king sees how two armies are methodically torn apart. His plan is coming together perfectly. They freeze in confusion when they realize. The Sagittarius's projectiles pass through them for a reason. One soldier, frozen with horror, looks at his own chest. He feels the bullets somehow attached to his body, pulsating with an unknown and threatening energy. The soldiers forcibly pull the sticky pulsating energy spheres toward each other. Their bodies collide, twisting into a chaotic, tangled heap as soon as the magical connection catches. With cold indifference, he watches as frantic screams of helpless men tear through the air. His calculated strike instantly neutralized the threat with surgical precision. Nearby, a young sorceress urges her giant beast. It growls, bares its jaws, and decisively charges forward, breaking through the frightened ranks of the enemy to take its rightful place at the right hand of the demonic lord. Seeing the battlefield ready for the final blow, the leader calls his mage. She responds instantly, summoning the power of the earth to rise and crush the remnants of resistance. The shockwave of gravitational force in a hellish pressure bites into the ground, pressing the soldiers with incredible weight. They gasp for air and cannot move a single muscle. Realizing the battle is completely lost against such undeniable power, the commanders of the defeated army scream frantically for a full retreat, and their men flee in panic, seeking salvation. As the dust begins to settle and the pounding of retreating footsteps quiets, the girl glances at her master and asks if they should catch up with the survivors and finish what they started. He shakes his head, kneels beside a fallen soldier, and explains. Further thefts will only confuse the new order he intends to establish. He chooses mercy over unnecessary slaughter. He stood before the gathered masses of the Demon Lord's army and declared his intention to redistribute the stolen skills. He promised to give each race the specific power it lacked, starting with the intellectual skill Lapithus. With a confident, self-satisfied smile and a snap of his fingers, he began the process. His hand glowed with the essence of stolen magic. A sudden surge of strength knocked one of the orcs off his feet. His eyes widened in shock, and for the first time his mind cleared. He took a sharp breath, trying to process the new clarity and the weight of the thought that had appeared. When the creature looked up in surprise, the young leader confirmed he had truly given them intelligence. The orc could only stammer in disbelief, asking what exactly had been done to him. Looking around, the soldier realized. The world looked completely different, and he had gained the ability to truly comprehend. A group of newly enlightened warriors bowed deeply, their voices trembling with emotion as they swore to repay the debt. He watched them, his face without any response, and accepted their oath of loyalty. Making his way through the stone corridors of the fortress, he ordered the others to line up evenly so that the distribution could continue without delays. Later, as he walked with his inner circle, he checked on the progress of their training. Jinru confirmed, everything was moving according to plan. The group was already moving through the castle corridors with a new sense of purpose. He stands next to Jinru and watches the orcs below as they undergo rigorous training. Jinru notes that the new system works effectively. The distribution of warriors according to their unique traits quickly forges a formidable force. A horse? No. The messenger warrior continues his face focused, and he points with a finger at a critical miss. For the army to really function, the food must be stable and reliable. Without this, nothing works. He gazes at the horizon. His eyes take in the desolate landscape of the demon lord's domain, acknowledging the harsh truth of their situation. Although scattered forests provide some meager resources, the land is mostly barren, and the threat of starvation hangs over their growing ranks. His thoughts drift back to simpler times. He recalls how a small band of thieves could easily manage their supplies. But keeping a huge army in order is a challenge of a completely different scale. With a sharp, analytical gaze, he begins to devise a plan to escape this logistical disaster. Returning to the young sorceress, he entrusted her with a thorough investigation of the natural resources of this domain. He inquired whether it was realistically possible to complete such a colossal survey in 1 month, and these words made her hesitate for a moment as she considered the tight deadlines. In response, she releases her power. A whirlwind of papers and magical energy rises around her. With a confident look, she declares, although such a task may be beyond a human's strength, for her a month is more than enough. He is stunned into silence, while the young girl easily handles the flow of information that would take a team of human scientists weeks to organize. Her efficiency is a sharp reminder that he now has incredible abilities at his disposal. He watches as Diana confidently reveals her secret trump card, secretary skill, a specialized ability that allows her to easily manage vast amounts of information. Based on her statement, she shows a detailed layout scheme of the map domain assets by cells. Yes, dwarves provide most of the ore, but we also need to consider exotic Nangon fruits and fish that devour people, as well as precious veins of mithril and adamantium. While she continues the report, she conveys to him a detailed summary of the assessed monthly harvests and expected reserves, leaving him alone with thoughts about the strategic value of these fruits and rare minerals. This data stream activates its own specialized capabilities, and as soon as the combined power of governance and strategy begins to unravel the logistical puzzle before it. Looking over the harsh landscape from above, he realized, an abundance of iron can truly transform the demon lord's domain into a hidden treasure idol for development. Entering his deep concentration, Elira addresses him with a touch of curiosity and respect. Her gaze is fixed on the young leader, who is contemplating their next move. Oven returns to his gathered followers and suggests, as soon as their tea time ends, to go for a walk and see the land with their own eyes. Their goal is clear: the mighty spires and fortified walls of the kingdom of Tristram, a fortress of human strength towering on the horizon. In the great council chamber, the air was heavy with the smell of old parchment and the feeling of an inevitable journey. The councillors sat around a long stone table, and the conversation turned to how exactly to organize the departure, agreeing that their entire company would set out for the kingdom of Tristram in one united circle, not in waves, to preserve strength and resources together for the road ahead. In the high council hall above the long stone table hangs a heavy silence. High Priestess Mari Conrad stands alone before the leaders of the kingdom, her posture frozen as she endures their watchful gaze. She endures the cold gaze of Vice King Corder, the Margrave of the Borderlands, who fixed his eyes on her, full of contempt. He does not dilute his opinion. He declares that her defeat is a disgrace and shame that has covered her position with dishonor. She is silent, her gaze lowered as if the weight of his words falls upon her. The title High Priest presses like a heavy burden when such public condemnation falls upon her. The memory of the battlefield is still vivid, a harsh verdict on why they lost. The new Demon King had colossal power, making any chance of victory seem distant, an impossible dream. The dark-haired official continues to pressure her, mocking the fact that she cannot hide her emotions. Courtier points to the suspicious nature of the result. While her companions lost even their abilities, she alone returned completely on skates. He slaps the table with his hand. The anger of the official bursts out as he demands immediate action. Even the king, sitting on the throne and watching, seems to agree. There is no choice. Troops must be sent to the border. The land they strive to reclaim is a bloody, desolate, shattered landscape, yet it holds the key to their future. Without control over the Demon King's domains, the kingdom will never secure the critically important resources needed for survival. Vice King Courtier concludes the meeting with a grim verdict on their situation. As an agrarian country, Tristan lacks mineral wealth to sustain a prolonged war, so the conquest of the demon lands is a matter of absolute necessity. He is interrupted by a voice echoing through the loophole, cheerfully noting, "Everyone has gathered in one place." This gruesome greeting immediately brings to mind the tragedies of the past. Exactly 50 years before that, a similar camp turned into a massacre. It took the lives of 10,000 soldiers. Returning to the present, the council members look at the fallen heroes, once again confirming the belief. Only a hero chosen by fate can truly kill the Demon King. Suddenly, the very cause of their fears reveals itself. Kid Lauberg and his gang of robbers burst into the room, stepping forward and mocking the desperate council conversation. The sight of the self-proclaimed Demon King standing before them sends a wave of shock through the Vice King, and Marie Conradthy can hardly believe their eyes. Vice Beniker shouted, calling the guards, but Keith only watches, thinking that a bird in a cage was never meant to fly free. While the guards have not yet managed to respond, Alira Quariata releases her dark magic. She binds the exits and scorches everything around with shards from her gaze so that no one can escape the room. Behind the heavy doors, the royal guard recoils in shock and fear, because the entrance suddenly and with fierce force slams shut, binding it with an icy spell. The cat commands the room with a tone of unquestionable authority. His gaze is sharp behind the glasses, and he orders the officials to take their seats. Behind him, the massive doors freeze shut, an icy reminder, it is the very power that holds them captive. The officers exchange cautious glances. Fear and outrage are frozen on their faces. They understand. They are trapped, forced to comply with the demands of the one they consider their fiercest enemy. As the group gathers around the long table, the full weight of the situation becomes clear. He leans back, studies the human representatives opposite, and says that this meeting has historic significance, the first true dialogue between a human ruler and a demon king. The Vice King is silent. His face is a mask of cold calculation. He recalls the welfare of his king and general, weighing, perhaps, the risks of this unprecedented summit against the stability of his kingdom. Breaking the heavy silence, the young man with horns leans forward, and a calm, confident smile barely flickers on his lips. He asks his captive audience if they are ready to begin the hearing. He gestures broadly, and the tone immediately shifts to diplomatic. Nearby, Alira watches closely as he makes it clear. Their goal is not to ignite war but to find another way forward. Looking at this with wide, uncertain eyes, Mari still hears him continue to offer reassurance. He insists he has no intention to use force or pressure, and assures that they will remain unharmed even if the negotiations fail to reach an agreement. Skeptical of such statements, the Vice King slams his fist on the table, demanding tangible proof that they will be released from the chamber safely. In response, Keith calmly states that he has exactly the evidence they need. He leans forward, his gaze sharp and unwavering, and points to the one undeniable truth. The very fact that his masters are still breathing was the best proof of his peaceful intentions. Continuing his speech before the gathered human leaders, he emphasized that this deterrence was only the first part of the evidence he laid on the table. The young man stubbornly declared his true goal, the establishment of formal diplomatic relations. His words so distorted the Vice King's face. Shock and outrage merged into one. He looked across the long negotiation table. The weight of his demand hung in the air as he insisted that the Demon Kingdom be officially recognized as a sovereign and legitimate state. In response, Vice King's fists clenched so tightly they turned white as he grabbed the edge of the table, and he rejected the proposal remarkably firmly, stating that such a step would destroy their authority in relations with every other human nation. In response to the refusal, he parried by referring to how borders shift on regional maps. While the Empire and Allied forces remained in bloody confrontation, humans had already abandoned their former military alliances the moment the war began. Smiling covertly, he inquired how these hostile factions would perceive their current neutrality, and this made the Vice King sharply bark back that any alliance with anyone would be a direct violation of their existing treaties. A heavy silence fell in the room as the human leaders exchanged glances, and suddenly felt growing anxiety. They already understood what strategic trap was being set for them. He sat silently while Kate leaned over the table, and his voice cut through the council's tension. The young demon warned. Their current security was only a temporary pause, and this raised a chilling question about the world's fate when this war finally ended. He continued to push his stubborn logic, gesturing to show what their reality looked like. Preparations for future clashes were already in full swing. He emphasized the glaring shortage of necessary minerals for their defense and added that a broken alliance would be the perfect spark for a new fire. Then the Demon King changed his tone, reminding the human leaders of the basic need to survive and a simple fact: his people needed to eat. The Vice King, focusing and hardening his gaze, demanded a clear summary of exactly what opinion Kate was trying to convey. He handed them a single broken piece of ore and explained that they had reached the agricultural lands of Tristram not just hungry, but with a wealth of raw materials. He challenged them again, asking how they intended to act now that the end of the war was finally in sight. He turned away for a moment, calling Diana, and she appeared amid a flash of magical energy. The king froze in stunned silence as the young summoner introduced her presence, once again emphasizing the weight of the demon's words. Then he laid out three inviolable proposals for establishing formal diplomatic relations: official recognition of the demon kingdom as a sovereign nation, public proclamation of its status before the world, and immediate initiation of trade. The vice-king carefully studied the document. The burden of these demands fell on him inevitably. A drop of sweat rolled down his weary face as he intently studied the conditions. The room was so silent it rang, and he weighed the salvation of his own kingdom against the unprecedented alliance offered to him. Finally he spoke. His voice was steady, though the decision was colossal in scale, and he officially accepted the terms. Kate looked at him intently, businesslike, and understood that the geopolitical landscape had just irreversibly changed. Negotiations between the human kingdom and the demon kingdom finally begin. The ornate castle town becomes the stage for this historic diplomatic mission. Far from the political maneuvers of the capital, the dense canopy of a remote forest lets through only patches of sunlight, hiding in its shadows another, no less brutal struggle. In the dark thicket, three travelers spring into action. Merrill unleashes a burst of flame at the huge beetle, while Zot and Helm, moving in sync, rush forward to finish off the beast. When the dust settles, Jelm, squinting, looks at the single charred carcass and frowns. He finally understands that hunting these creatures alone is a painfully slow path to progress. Wiping sweat from his forehead, he complains. At this pace, they will have to spend years restoring what they lost. But the size of the city hall, he wishes it were possible to simply find a whole swarm and handle everything at once. Their conversation is interrupted by a rustle below, underfoot. Several small, winding creatures appear, and Zot quickly recognizes them as simple larvae worthless for experience, and scattered carelessly across the forest floor. When the mayor of Alda recalls his family's history with farming, a spark of inspiration lights up in Jelma's Aishi's thoughts latch onto the idea of what these creatures could become, if allowed to reach fully grown forms. He suddenly jumps up sharply, and a broad smile spreads across his face as the details of the new plan fall into place, much to the surprise of his comrades. He raises the twisted, dark larva to the light and smiles with a sly gleam in his eyes, calling his comrades for help. Meralda and Zot recoil, clearly disgusted, and ask if he is in his right mind, for he takes hold of this slimy creature so fervently. Despite their evolution, he leans forward with a sharp, focused gaze and announces his grand plan. They are not just hunting these creatures, they are going to breed them. He outlines the logistics. If they fill the warehouse with fertilizer and oil, they will be able to grow their own private crop of monsters right under their noses. A nasty smile, predatory, spreads across his face as he imagines an endless avalanche of experience points and a cycle of breeding and harvesting that will bring them immeasurable power. The boldness of the plan spurs the company. They get to work, while he and Merlada collect larvae from the forest litter. The hefty creative supplies of Zot Hall fall on them, initially causing disgust, but in a moment it is washed away by the shared excitement of a quick path to power. A whole month of waiting passes, and only then does the trio return to the sturdy wooden warehouse she prepared. The building stands silently in a clear space. The warrior rubs his chin and optimistically hopes for a catch of at least 500 beetles, while the others remain more cautious about the actual outcome of their experiment. With a steady hand, he reaches for the heavy door and prepares to open the results of their monthly investment. He wants to know if his bet paid off. Carefully sliding aside the heavy wooden door, and as soon as a wild scratching bursts from inside, he freezes. Beyond him, the mage watches increasingly anxiously, and her voice trembles as she suggests that perhaps their experiment was a little too successful. Through the darkness, he hears a buzzard. The young leader is met by a nightmare, the rustle of shells and flashing eyes. The floor and walls roll with a carpet of insects, far more than he could have imagined. Suddenly, the pressure from inside becomes unbearable. The warehouse doors are torn off, and they fly outward, cracking. He is almost knocked off his feet as a wave of dark figures breaks into daylight with a deafening collective screech. When the dust settles, the three stand before the ruined building and freeze in shock. The entrance is gone, and only a hole remains. The explosive force of the insect exit shattered the building's facade to pieces. He leans even closer. His eyes widen as he realizes these are not ordinary beetles. They are unnaturally large, with fang-like horns and shimmer with a creepy, sickly-laid hue. While his companion doubts the safety, the rest of the warehouse structure begins to groan and bend under the weight of the remaining swarm. The swarm does not stay on the ground for long. Rising into the air in a huge, swirling vortex that completely blocks the sun, it can only watch frozen and freeze in silent shock while the living cloud drifts away, evidence of a plan that spun out of control and lost control. Exhausted and bewildered, the group settles on the dirt to recover from the disaster. The mage aloud wonders if these creatures were ever intended to be so aggressive. And the warrior, with grim curiosity, notices all the offspring have already taken to the sky. Realizing the consequences of his farming project, the young man suddenly lunges forward and, without turning back, shouts over his shoulder that he has no idea how it happened. His companions remain in the dust, calling after him as he flees the place of his accidental appearance. While Joan flees from the chaos he himself created, the camera goes far, far away to the majestic spires of the royal castle. Within the stone walls, silence is shattered by a frenzied rhythm, boots wildly pounding on the polished floor. The messenger bursts abruptly into the private office of Vice King Quarter, gasping for breath, and announces that he brings news of extraordinary urgency. He recounts a terrible warning from the court astrologer. She saw a dark omen in the crystal ball. An ancient prophecy is unfolding in the territory of the Demon King, and it threatens to destroy the entire world. Weising's eyes widen sharply, and a grim realization dawns on him. He demands to know whether the royal land itself is an immediate threat. Meanwhile, Jingru and his companions gather together. Everyone's faces are grim until the swordsman steps forward to announce his own alarming report. The source of horror is revealed. On the horizon rises a gigantic dragon, a creature of myth and destruction, flying straight to the very heart of the Demon King's domain.